2 days later, a small crowd had gathered in the yard of Polinia's home. The guests all wearing amulets to protect themselves, with few really understanding why they were there. The only thing they knew was they were all being paid for only a little bit of time to stand there as a ghostly child walked around them, staring deeply into their souls and watching as they cast some simple spells before calling out once he was done. "All right, I got everything I needed." "All right, wonderful," Aber said. "In that case, thank you all for your time. For your own safety, we ask that you begin making your way back to your homes or go off to enjoy the city itself. You're all welcome to keep the amulets, so it's the perfect time to take in some of Analia's wonders." For what they were going to be doing, having too many other bodies there would only put them at risk given how Bloom's birth had turned out, the spirit nearly insane from the unexpected altering of its very nature, even if he had become more and more stable with each passing day. Ben's eyes turned to that very one, having joined the rest of them with a body he'd created for himself. Made of living wood with a green surface layer of photosynthetic cells, he'd created himself a form that was undeniably male, with 2 arms and legs. A shape that was familiar without being the general form of an incubus. The body Bloom had made was modeled after Ben's own, the second spirit in the world to use him for inspiration. "Well, I guess that even if I die, I've left my mark now that 2 different immortals have decided they want to look like me." He noticed Thera glancing that way too, her eyes shifting between Bloom, O'Gilt, and Ben before shaking her head, whispering at his side, "Try not to let this go to your head too much. All right, as long as you try not to get distracted by just how handsome a couple of your newer uncles are." She gave him a look, not one chuckle coming from the joke. "Should I even be thinking of Bloom as an uncle? He's younger than me. Why would he be younger than you? None of the spirits who went into him are." "Okay, sure. But he himself was only born from them a couple days ago. I mean, if he's not your uncle, then I think he's your grandson then. Which means Pollinia gets to enjoy being a great-grandmother now too. Think she'll get a kick out of that?" "I know I don't." "Okay, you win. He's my uncle now because we are not about to say everyone Mora's about to change are his children. Anyway, just be ready so we don't get any repeats." "Yeah, you got it." The great spirits had been careful in selecting the regular spirits they'd be changing, making sure they were all fully informed of what would happen and what they could expect from it, with Ben having checked all of their minds to be sure they really understood things and were prepared for what was to come, with him still standing by to assist with whatever issues might still come once the change happened. They'd all prepared the best they could. All that was left was beginning. "So what should I start with?" Mora asked them, with Lux stepping forward. "Blessing magic. If there's any issues, at the very least it's not a destructive affinity. It will be a good test case." Mora nodded as light and life spirits came forward, all of them abuzz with the idea of a change, even if it was from curiosity more than excitement. They weren't against it, they were interested and curious, but in a far more muted way than he would have expected from any mortal gaining the level of power they were about to. Of course, on the one hand, any mortal might be a lot less excited if they knew they were only going to be getting that power after being merged with a bunch of others, but on the other hand, the spirits don't seem to care about that fact at all. "Oh well, let's see how this goes." Ben in particular was watching with wide eyes, not wanting to blink and miss a second of what was about to happen, when he'd already missed out on witnessing both the birth of Bloom and the other plant spirits. Souls were one of his many topics of research, something he alone in the universe held the power to create too. How could he not want to see whatever change would take place in the souls of the spirits around him to let them grow into something more? Support the creativity of authors by visiting the original site for this novel and more. With the soul sight he held giving him the perfect view as he tried to work out exactly what was happening once Mora began, watching as some structures within them were shifted and changed. His connect stretched out to observe the minds of the spirits themselves too while it was happening before it was done, the alteration snapping into place as the spirits Mora had worked on collapsed to a central point and immediately began to scream. "Oh, that's not good." Singular mind as the first waves of mana came off it while he repeated the exact thing he'd done with the plant spirit. Merging into its deepest levels while it was being driven mad by the nature of its existence, he gave it all he knew of blessing magic and the experience using it of the 2 holders of it he was aware of while trying to cement its identity with a name, speaking it in both thought and voice. "You are Grace." he said firmly, feeling it calm down as it drifted over to his arms, letting itself be held for what comfort it could bring. And that did not go as well as we'd hoped. How bad was it then? Abris asked him, whatever problem there was fixed before any of the others could react. About as bad as with Bloom. It looks like even if they think they're prepared for it, having their nature changed in such a way is just too much of a shock. It was an answer that got some frowns from the others, but the biggest reaction from Mora, the boy slipping back to take Thera's hand while she turned to him. If it's that bad, then we should stop, she told them. Even if Ben's dealing with it, hurting them like that, even if it's only going to be briefly, isn't going to be good for Mora. You're not wrong, Ben agreed, seeing the conflicted faces of the other spirits, while he kept comforting Grace with his thoughts. But before we give up completely, Mora, would you be willing to try just one more thing for me? If the outcome is just as bad, then we'll stop. We don't want you doing anything that's going to make you feel guilty. All right, what? The boy asked, trusting Ben and looking curious about wherever his thoughts were going. We still need to make Grace more regular spirits as well, but I'd like to put that idea on hold for a couple minutes while we test another way of creating a new great spirit first. Another way? Funa asked him. Watching once and you found a second method already? Nothing that exciting. Anyone could have thought of this. If there's no great spirit for them, then a group of the available spirits will merge together into one, and we've already seen that when Mora helps a group of combined affinity spirits be born, then they don't have any issues. To me at least, that would imply that if he helps create new regular spirits, the lack of a great spirit for them will make them merge together, hopefully in a way that will be less traumatic for them. It was an idea that perked the rest up with interest now that their first attempt had gone no better, even with all of the planning behind it. But there was only one opinion that really mattered as all eyes turned to Mora to see what he had to say, with the boy nodding in the end. We'll try it. What magic this time then? I say we balance out the birth of a blessing spirit with a curse one, Ben suggested. Nothing else is going to be as harmless now that blessing magic's been taken anyway, so it's not like there's a right choice, but if things do go wrong again, that's probably going to be one of the slightly less destructive options we could end with. There was no disagreement to that, and the death and dark spirits needed came forward, this time spending their mana while Mora used his magic and Thera empowered them as Ben watched. At first thinking he was wrong as the first few cursed spirits were born, but finding all of that changed only moments after, their numbers grown enough to reach the tipping point and their newfound existence instantly changed as they collapsed into each other, the first great cursed spirit being born as a result. With Ben instantly in its mind and breathing a small sigh of relief as a result. It wasn't scared, panicked, or confused. It wasn't suffering from an identity crisis, and it certainly wasn't insane. It was a cursed spirit, born from those who had been made before it and only lacking in experience as to what that would mean it could do. We've got a success, Ben sighed, losing some tension he hadn't noticed he'd been carrying as all of the others breathed their own sighs of relief, with Thera turning to him now that it was done. Looks like you're not getting to name every new great spirit then. Ha, hey, you never know. Maybe they'll realize they like my naming sense. Ha! Or maybe the others can help them think of something a bit more creative, she teased. Bloom for a plant spirit and Grace for a blessing one? You didn't exactly put loads of thought into that. Hey now, it's descriptive. Considering I was trying to make sure they understood what they were when I named them too, I'd say I did a pretty good job of it. And that means we can continue so long as Mora is all right with it, Abris said, getting a nod from the soul spirit. Yeah, we can continue. With no disaster accompanying that attempt, he sounded almost excited, looking forward to seeing what his powers could do, and with nothing else to slow them down the process went on, once more changing the shape of the world. The blessing and curse spirits, lightning, fungal and magma spirits, decay spirits, mud spirits, and more. If the great spirits were able to find holders of a given magic, then they had brought them, no matter how obscure the combined affinity might have been, and ended with more combined great spirits than pure ones by the end as the yard was filled with them and the smaller spirits they'd rule over. The very nature of their race and their status within the world permanently changed. They had been the most powerful beings on the planet since the moment they'd arrived, and now their numbers had grown like never before. It was a change that was certain to have some sort of fallout, but whatever it ended up being, Ben felt confident that the world would still be better for it. He'd look in all of their thoughts and the minds of the spirits who'd parented them, and Abris and the others had done a good job in their selection. Their natures had transferred over enough that, even if they'd all still grow and change as time went on like any living being, he felt confident that the odds of any of them growing to be as callous as Vividus could be were low. A feeling that he only needed to look to the side to confirm, with many of the new great spirits already surrounding Thera to give their greetings or to just talk. The love for their princess carried down their family line. Which means there's only one more thing to do. What? No, obviously not. What he did instead was reach out around him, trying to push Connect in a slightly different way by copying the skills of each spirit onto his rings. While each magic was the equivalent of a 9th-leveled awakened magic, the power of the spirits themselves was unleveled, and while he had Ulil's archmagic already, having better individual variants at his fingertips would only help him when it came time to build up whatever enchantments he'd need. Smiling at the end as they all went down. And done. Perfect. What? Come on. None of this was even my idea. If I just happened to find a little benefit for myself after, then what's the harm? I'm just trying my best to be a good guardian for Mora. And speaking of... He crouched down beside the boy, watching as he looked around at all he'd helped create with interest before Ben pulled him from his thoughts. So, still feeling okay about all of this? It's too late not to be. Ha! Sure, but that's not what I asked. The narrative has been taken without permission. Report any sightings. I am, he said after a moment's thought. This is the first time I've pushed myself like that. It felt good. Good. But that leaves us one more thing to talk about, kiddo. What? You made sure that every great spirit got their own regular spirits, and you know I'm a mind reader. I could tell that even the perfectly sane ones didn't feel right or complete until they had some to look after themselves, but now what about you? How do you feel? You know I'm different from other great spirits. Sure. But that has nothing to do with my question, buddy. Even if the way you were born has left its marks on who you are, that doesn't mean you're so different from them either, which is why I'm asking. If you don't want any other soul spirits to exist, then that's fine, but if there's another reason you aren't making any, then I hope you'll talk to me about it. Great spirits don't need me to look after them. He started as he looked around at all he'd helped bring into the world. They're independent, and because they weren't born the same way as me, they're, I don't know, mature? I know it's unnatural for me to be a child. You've got all the time in the world to grow up. Try not to worry about it. Mora didn't respond to his comment. His mind focused on trying to put his own thoughts together. And all of the new regular spirits I've made, even if they might need someone to take care of them, they have their great spirits too, and they can all handle it. I'm sure they can, yeah. But I can't handle it, he said in the end, a touch of frustration reaching his voice. If I make them and they have any problems, I don't think I can help. I know I'm powerful, but I'm just a kid, and things worked out, but I made a really wrong choice when I created Bloom. Great spirits have to be better than that. Oyo. So what I'm hearing is you would like there to be soul spirits, you just don't think you can fill the role of their great spirit, is that right? Yeah. Well then, the solution's simple, he said with a grin before scooping Mora up and placing him on his shoulders, spinning around. Look around you, Mora. Who do you all see? Spirits. Family, Ben corrected before calling out in a louder voice for all to hear. Hey everyone. You all know Mora's still young. If he makes some soul spirits, can you all help with managing them until he's ready to act as their great spirit himself? The question was asked, and instantly they were flooded with agreement. Everyone saying yes in their own way so loudly that their voices all muddled together until Abris waved them down and stepped forward for them all. Of course, the Earth Spirit said. Even if we primarily focus on our own element, all of the spirits are our collective responsibility. If they need help, then we will give it to them until the day you feel ready to step into the role yourself. But what if I'm never ready? Mora asked. Then we'll look after them forever while you live your life. Do not worry, Mora. If you make them, they will be protected and they will be loved. You can count on that. With everyone behind Abris showing their agreement, what was there to fear? His newfound family had told them he could count on them. He just needed to trust them, and with one more look to both Ben and Thera, He called over the life and death spirits of the world, trying to create something different. While soul magic wasn't a combined affinity but instead the endpoint of two separate ones, Mora already knew from his own existence that he could treat it as such to get the outcome he wanted, bringing one final group into the world with the power he held, the great soul spirit no longer alone. Princess, doesn't the morning mist make for such a lovely greeting? Not as nice as the smell of smoke. Why not indulge? I hear mortals tend to find comfort in such things. Better to start the day energized, another voice said. I'm pretty sure the subtle signals in your biochemistry will dash. I don't need to be electrocuted. Thank you, Thera said as she walked through the halls, surrounded by the new great spirits of the world, as she dealt with a small side effect she hadn't fully expected to have to handle when more of them were made. Her family, the original members of it at least, were the 8 great spirits who'd come to that new planet after the fall of their old one, and for good or ill, their opinions of her hadn't shifted anywhere near as radically as the regular spirits had when they changed how they viewed her. Now though, that was no longer true. Swarmed by the new great spirits who'd been born of those who loved her and inherited those feelings as well, it seemed that she wouldn't be losing her place as their princess anytime soon. But with a place of ruling came the occasional need to be stern as she looked at all of them who surrounded her, keeping their original forms for the moment with nothing else picked like her father had and leaving her to speak up. All of you, I know you're excited, but you each have a lot to do, don't you? Great spirits don't get to rest so easily. Not just looking after the small ones, they had to figure out what part, if any, they wanted to play in the planet's defense, all of them being given the same freedom of choice as Mora so long as what they wanted wasn't going to actively hinder the others. And on top of that, they needed to devote time to understanding who they were as well. Great spirits were less defined by their element than the regular ones could be, but that didn't mean it had no effect on them at all, and they were each just so new. Even in the normal case where a great spirit would die and be replaced, the ones who would combine into a new one each had an eternity behind them to make up what they were, but not so here. Except for Bloom and Grace, every combined great spirit had spent at most only seconds as the regular ones after they'd been born. The mana that made them up would carry some of the memories and information of the spirits who'd created them, but they didn't have experience as beings of their new combined affinities, and all of them needed to put time into learning just who and what they were. With the comment of their princess having the weight to make them go to start figuring it out, leaving one by one, just as cheerful as when they'd arrived with only a few parting words before giving her some breathing room. I wonder if I'm ever going to get any downtime again after all of this? She couldn't help but ask herself. Even then, her mana empowering was as stretched out as it could be, with all of the new spirits taking advantage of it to help grow their numbers, and while she had no issue with any of them seeking her out for help or even to chat, it felt like it was going to be coming a lot more. Still, it's for the best, she told herself, feeling a genuine smile touch her lips as she opened a door to the packed room beyond, with Lux watching over Saren and Mora, the toddler sitting comfortably on his technically younger cousin's lap, while Mora did his best to talk to a few of the soul spirits who were hanging around him, with none of them being the ones to notice her enter. No, that privilege was reserved for both the fairy and the earth spirit among them, with the first darting forward to plant herself squarely on Thera's face. Thera, it's been too long, Insha yelled out, her flames warm and muffling as Thera tried to reply. Sorry I haven't been able to come by in a bit, Insha. Work's been a lot and I've been avoiding walking through here since I didn't want to discuss Mora with my parents, and anyway, I'll be popping through a bit more often again, so I'll make sure I stop to see you when I do. Okay? Okay. And it's good to see you too, Rocky. Have you been doing well? As always. Good. Good. And I see you've both met Mora now? The family only ever gets bigger. Huh. Yeah. It's great. Insha laughed before flying over to her newest cousin. The baby of the family. I'm not a baby, Mora said, still speaking with his mana to the spirits in the room as he answered. You're not even a year old yet. So, that means you're a baby. Not to worry though. If you have any issues, just come to your big cousin, Insha told him, puffing out her chest proudly. I'll help you out. Thera chuckled at the small exchange, enjoying it for all it was worth. Even if Mora was being a bit quiet with Insha for now, she was comfortable chalking it up to shyness compared to what things had been like in the past. Even just yesterday he'd been a lot more talkative with both her and Ben, finally feeling like he was really opening up to them. It's nice. While they had their little back and forth, her aunt patted the seat beside her, the invitation clear for Thera as she went to sit down, resting her head on Lux's shoulder. Nice, isn't it? The light spirit asked. It is. I should have brought him sooner. Unauthorized duplication. This tale has been taken without consent. Report sightings. Oh, don't worry about such things too much. Parenthood is something you figure out as you go along. MMH. She still stood by that she was acting as his guardian, but when it came down to it, it didn't feel like there was really a difference, so she held her tongue. For Mora's sake too. She didn't know how he'd feel personally if she kept insisting she wasn't his parent, and with things going so well, she didn't want to risk ruining the progress they'd made with a thoughtless comment either. And I guess it doesn't really matter in the end. She told herself. The roles are the same, it would just be nice to know what he thinks about it too. The boy's relationship with his actual parents was a whole other issue they hadn't spoken about, nor did she know if she should. There were levels of complications to it that she didn't have any idea how to begin to address. How did one talk to a child about his abandonment, or for that matter, about the expectations behind his birth and how the two were connected? But I didn't ask him about why he didn't want to use his magic either, and look at all that happened. She thought with a heavy sigh. But this and that aren't necessarily the same things either, but there's no way to know if it will cause issues down the line if I don't try to talk to him about it, but maybe it will just make things worse for him if I do when it seems like he's moving on from it, and maybe Lux is right. Parenthood is something you figure out as you go along. Perhaps it wasn't perfect advice, and she didn't know if she could really be a parent to Mora, but she could be his family and she'd do her best. With it clear she wasn't going to be alone in it either. She had her family. All of them both new and old, and that wasn't all she had as the door opened once more. Both her mother and Ben coming through. Sorry that took a while, he said. Needed to give Valeria a bit more help than expected, and she asked if I could try to help her raise her Connecta level before I left. Everything good here? Fantastic, she told him, this time patting the seat beside her as he squeezed onto the couch with them, while her mother took her place beside Mora. Anything else happen? Not really. I spoke with the Smoke and Miss Spirits a bit while I passed them. The two seemed to be in a pretty heated debate about their affinities and wanted some outside opinions, but lucky for them, they happened to ask probably the only guy who knows entire books of spells for such obscure branches. Ha! It feels like you've won from this as much as anyone, she teased. Mr. Magic Expert right here now has swarms of people who are going to be figuring out all of the finer details of every weird and obscure combined affinity. Well, not exactly everyone, he sighed. What I wouldn't have given for just a handful of time spirits to have stuck around. What's so good about the end of the universe? Anyway, if they'd stayed, forget all of the time branches, Mora should have been able to, in theory, create a general magic spirit. Ugh. The loss of potential right there. It's going to drive me insane to think about. Now there was an idea that would never get to see its full worth. They already knew Uriel, who'd started with a general magic skill. One that combined all of the affinitied magics of the world, but it was a path the spirits would never be able to replicate, with Lux laughing at the thought. It would have been far nicer if they never went at all, but sadly, our nature as we know it means not a single time spirit could have stayed behind. The paradox of it trapped them all here unless they all left together. Paradox. Only one great spirit of any affinity can exist. It seems that's true of the combined affinities too, Lux said, nodding Mora's way, and seemed to have asked him a similar question that Ben had while she'd been alone with him. But if the great time spirit moved himself to the future, then in the present, there'd be no great time spirit and a new one would be born. Then once time caught up to whatever future they sent themselves to, there'd be two of them and they could just repeat the process again and again, creating an endless supply, but it seems there's no way to cheat that one bit of our nature. Interest? Ben muttered, the idea driving him deep into his thoughts at a fact that Thera couldn't help but regard with only mild interest. Even if they hadn't known what would happen to their race and their world as a whole, the time spirits had in essence abandoned the rest of their kind to whatever fate they'd hold. It wasn't something she held against them. She didn't really feel anything for them one way or another. She just couldn't help to think that if she'd been driven by some desire to do the same thing that they had, then she would have at least broken the trip up into fragments. Jumps of 100 or even 1,000 years at a time, what did it matter? For beings with an infinite lifespan, why be in such a rush to reach its end? Well, it doesn't matter anymore. They'd made their choice, and if by some chance they ever did reappear before the end of everything, they were sure to be in for quite the surprise. A lost world, and, if they managed to find that new one, so many new members of their kind, the likes of which they'd never before imagined. Well, speaking of going, her mother spoke up, having managed to get Mora, Insha, and Saren all tight in her arms during the brief distraction the conversation had provided. You're taking on another tower in a day or two, aren't you? We are, Mom. Don't worry though, it'll be fine. Who's worried? I just thought you'd need someone to babysit for you. Mora, sweetheart? Wouldn't you like to have a day or two to be spoiled by Grandma? I think I just want to stay with Delaire, please. Boo, but fine. I suppose I need to put in some more work making sure you'll choose me next time then, which means my mean daughter needs to make sure you visit more. I'll be bringing him by plenty from now on, so he can see everyone in the family. And what do you mean by mean? I'm basically a saint for putting up with your antics for as long as I did. You are literally a saintess though, Ben muttered, getting his nose flicked as a result and making Polinia's mock sadness slip for just a moment before she put it back on and started to play it up. You didn't introduce me to my first grandchild. For what? Weeks? I wasn't able to properly bond. I wanted a little grandma's boy. Mora, if she's too much then you can come sit with me and Ben. It's okay. She means well, he said before flinching at the naked joy his answer gave. Right? When she isn't trying to entertain herself then she does. Thera relented. But that doesn't mean you should just let her get away with everything. If she makes you uncomfortable at all then just let me know. I'll make sure she doesn't do it again. She watched her mom mouth the word parent at her with a playful grin that she ignored, not wanting Mora to mistake who her glare was meant for. And no matter what she can be like, she doesn't hesitate to show people she loves them at least. She admitted, giving her mother the smallest of passes. After all, she herself didn't think she was great at it, but she wanted Mora to feel loved. The more who could help with that, the better. Hey, any chance you know where Bloom went off to? Ben asked at the start of the day, getting a nod from Lux while her focus remained on playing with her son. He's out helping in the fields right now. What, like farming? Ha, I suppose you could say that. You put the country in charge of your god crystals and they're seeing some good use. We already had a handful of awakened dryads hired to look after them, and since his magic is still new to him, getting him to help was a good way to add some experience to that power. We've been trying to set that up for all of the new great spirits, although since finding mortals with awakened versions of every obscure magic is going to be impossible, some of them are going to have to make do by interacting with those who hold the skills in their first-tier state. All right, cool, but darn, he muttered, making the light spirit chuckle. If you need him for a bit, then we can call him back for you. There'll be no harm in giving him a break. Ah, I need him for a bit more than just a break is all, he explained, rubbing his head as he did. We're dropping Mora off today at a small dryad village to watch him while we take on the tower dash. And you wanted him to help out around there? Maybe meet a few plant magic users? Well, yeah, but no. I did think it would be a good experience for him, but my main concern was having someone with Mora while we're away, just in case anything happens. Isn't that exactly what your babysitters are for? Okay, again, yeah, but I was thinking more about something above their pay grade. Mora has made a whole lot of new spirits. I'm worried that word might make it back to his mother and make her try to see him while we aren't around to deal with it. Vividus enjoyed seeing the results of her experiments, and just because she'd abandoned the one he was helping to raise didn't mean she wouldn't go back now that a new and exciting result had revealed itself. If such a thing were to happen, then he wanted to be around for it, and he knew Thera would want to be there too. Having another great spirit there could at least ease things for if she tried anything, either by being able to send for the other great spirits or even just being a distraction in and of himself thanks to his nature as both one of the combined spirits and as something that was once, at least in part, some of the life spirits she'd look after in the world. If you discover this tale on Amazon, be aware that it has been unlawfully taken from Royal Road. Please report it. The explanation brought both a thoughtful and concerned look to Lux's face though, the Great Spirit thinking before she spoke. While I would doubt she'd go out of her way to find him, I suppose it's not impossible either. I know she's been working on her Chimera project, but she has her whims once something catches her interest. Still, even if Bloom might have benefited from some time around some more plant magic users, theirs is a better option. Let me grab Ogilt. He's not still here all of the time, is he? A lot less. He goes out to hunt demons every now and then, but he always winds up back here when he's done. Still, even if he's improved a bit, he doesn't have any real work in the world. He can spare a few days to watch his nephew and do some chores in the village to help out, and if by some chance Vividus does come by, he can bring Mora back here in a snap and the rest of us can have some words with her. All right, fantastic, that works. Thanks, Lux. Of course, I have to make sure I improve my impression with my first nephew after all. Walking through Stonewall once everyone was gathered, Thera didn't comment on the looks they got going through the streets, but it was clear all eyes were on Ben. A fact he himself was easily ignoring, even if it was obvious his standing in town had changed. Fear and awe were both openly displayed in equal parts, but that was the choice he'd made, taking on the blame for everything and working to repair it, something he had known back when he'd done it. But at least nobody decided to run me out of town as soon as I arrived. I'm pretty sure that counts as a win. Yeah, I know. It wasn't long until they were going to knock on that very person's door, with Sakhel answering when they did, looking curiously at the unexpected addition of Ogilt standing by their side. Hey Sakhel, we're just here to drop the kiddo off, he said brightly. Mind letting the others through first? I want to talk to you just a bit. Yeah, go ahead. She stepped by for the other three to pass, giving Ben the chance to speak once they were alone. Myriad told me you helped cool things down a bit for us while we were away. Thank you. I won't forget that, Sakhel. What? No, not at all. She rushed to say. You and Thera have both helped me out plenty. That was nothing, and besides, most of it was Cecily and Aso anyway. Anoius. And I'll make sure I thank them too, but here you are in front of me, so let me just know if you ever need anything. Items, knowledge, wealth, whatever. I don't want to be the sort who doesn't pay off their debts. Ben, there's no debt. We're friends. I wouldn't just stand by and let you be run out of town. Well, we appreciate it, me and Thera both. Thanks. No debt. Huh? He didn't like the thought of leaving a favor unpaid, but if there was nothing she wanted, then there was nothing he could do but keep an eye out for any time in the future he could make up for it. But with all that needed saying said, he went through to the rest of the Dryads, to say hello to Fontesh and his little apprentice before he'd need to take on a whole new tower. So things went well with Sakhel? Thera asked as they made their way through the magic towers, that not being their final destination but instead just a close stop to get to the World's Gate network. Yeah, she said she didn't need anything and she just did it because we're friends, but I'll still try and keep an eye out for where I can make it up to her. There's always room to try and upgrade her equipment some more. Maybe Raelia's too if I get the chance, although shapeshifting would make things a bit harder on that front. Actually, how would I? MMH? I'll have to workshop that a bit. I think that might just stress her out more in the end. I'm pretty sure she's humble enough that she's never going to get used to receiving ultra-rare and legendary items. Well, maybe I'll have to change that, he laughed back. Either way, I'll keep an eye out for anything she might need. No rush. And are you okay? She finally asked. Even if nobody said anything, the reaction you got in town doesn't matter to me, he shrugged. The people who know me don't seem to care, and if the ones who don't aren't going to raise any problems, then that's fine too. They'll get over it eventually. Until someone spreads word that there's a guy hidden in Stonewall with unbelievable godlike power, she teased. Well, if anyone tries, they're being sent straight on their way. I am so not putting up with a whole new recruitment drive after what I dealt with awakening my crafting, and I think I've already made that clear. There is a reason so many of my orders started coming through from the gods instead of individual nations. I guess you do always have the option of just throwing anyone who bothers you as far as you can. Okay. I'm not that strong yet. What? Don't think you could throw someone into orbit if you had your jacket on? Could I? He hadn't exactly tested his combat capabilities for when he'd overfill his soul. He had no doubt they'd be impressive given that, if it came down to it and he didn't worry about the damage he would sustain, he could materialize an entire building, but when applying all of that power to a single direct act like seeing how far or high he could throw something with magic. I haven't bothered to calculate my new mana maximum after I escaped the demon world, but with the new skills I've gotten it's going to be crazy high. Maybe I really could throw someone into space? Not exactly something I could test, even if I tried it on a rock that was just about a person's weight and had Myriad watch it. If it came back down that might end up pretty bad, but, well, I suppose I really do need to start looking a bit more into my combat potential. One of many tasks still to get done, but he needed to focus on his first one as they finally left the streets and reached the gate, stepping through the network and beyond to the one they needed to see what laid in wait. With the answer still largely being devastation. The city surrounding the tower itself was still destroyed by the wrath of the spirits after they'd learned just what had been done to their kin, and given was a low priority. It was now that the invasion point that had been there had been permanently closed. There wasn't even a purely defensive reason to try and clean it up. There were at most a few adventurer parties out there patrolling the area, not wanting to leave the space entirely unattended to make way for any demons or other beasts to slip through the gate, with signs of some scavenging clear in the ruins too. Either people coming back to look for personal items after that destruction or else anyone who came through to find anything that might have survived and still carried any value. Still, those few touches weren't enough to keep nature from doing what it would, with plants growing through the rubble while other, smaller creatures made themselves at home. Nature showing that through all of that it would win in the end. It was enough to bring his mind to the demon worlds as the two of them walked through it. It looked like they'd done their best to clear out the planets they'd conquered in their entirety of all other life, but there still had to be some scraps remaining, no matter how slim those would be. Bugs to be found here and there, some grasses too. Hell, the oceans had to be filled with algae still at the very least, and maybe a few more minuscule fish that might go unnoticed. While he could easily imagine some of the aquatic demons taking on filter feeder roles, it would be a hard environment to truly sterilize. But would all of that be enough? He wondered. If we could clear every world of the demons living on them, would that be enough for them to recover? He supposed the answer was yes, so long as the scale for such a thing was in the millions of years, letting bigger, more diverse plants grow from any of the simpler ones that might remain while whatever animal life still existed would have to go through the same, but at that timescale, it didn't matter. The galaxy had basically been cleansed, and if the solution for that was waiting for millions of years to pass after all of the demons died off, then they didn't have a solution. It was as simple as that.
Alpha Metono Vitayo.
This narrative has been unlawfully taken from Royal Road. If you see it on Amazon, please report it. And, I'm being a downer. He sighed. Chin up already. I'm about to take on Craftsman's Tower. The one that relates to me more than any other I've challenged. This is an exciting moment. He tried to force some cheer back into his minds because that was the truth of it. He was excited. It was the tower that matched him the most, and more important than any of that, it was one that wouldn't kill him. Finally, a tower that he could fully enjoy for the challenge it presented without having to worry about the harm it might hold. After all, this one isn't going to destroy my freaking heart, and, being positive here, not gonna think about the last one we took on. Before they'd left Stonewall, they'd gone through his workshops and fully loaded up his rings, wanting to be prepared for anything, and now they were finally there. After getting through the rubble, they stood in front of the door they'd be challenging, seeing it marked with the various crafting disciplines it would hold, and left only to wait for the other three to arrive, with it not being long for the next to show up as Will trudged through the wreckage to meet them. "Hey, been a while," was all he said as he made his way to them, looking worn out and tired on closer inspection, with signs of all the work he'd been given evident. Will, like so many of the other summoned, had been promised riches and status in exchange for his work, and with the war in full swing it was time to pay it off. The signs of how much he'd been doing leaving its mark in a way that even taking on a tower could be considered a break for him. Jake and Amy managed to escape some of it themselves since leveling their skills and hopefully even awakening was being treated as a priority, but even they would almost certainly be worked like dogs once the third wave arrived, whether they succeeded in reaching the third tier or not. Really, given how soon the demons had invaded after the humans and other summoned arrived on the world, Ben might have been the biggest winner despite how things had started for him. He didn't get to be spoiled for the first few years, but now, despite how hard he was working for it anyway, he had no obligations to help either, freeing him to direct his focus where he wanted to rather than being tied to the whims of others. When they had all been told that the invasion could have been up to 20 years away, it had surely seemed like an excellent deal, but now, He couldn't help but wonder at how many would have chosen to strike out on their own like Pato had if they'd been aware that they'd need to fight in not even 5. Well, still probably plenty of them, I guess. If everyone was going to die anyway, might as well enjoy the few years of riches first. And I'm being negative again. It could be so inescapable, but that was what thinking about the world brought, leaving a constant need for distraction with his friend being the perfect thing as he slapped Will's shoulder and gave him a grin. Been a while, man. How you holding up? Ugh. So constantly tired, he said, trying to smile back. It's felt like a long, long time since I've gotten a break. You wouldn't believe how jealous Steph is. Ha, well, as my only human buddy without a tower blessing, I figured this would be as good a way as any to correct that. If you need a nap, though, feel free while we go through this if you see the chance. I don't expect you to do anything. God, Ben, keep trying to seduce me with those sweet little words and Steph is going to get jealous, he joked, a bit more energy coming back to him with the conversation as Thera joined in too. And she didn't come to see you off then? It's too bad. It would have been nice to see her. Ah, just because I get this as a break doesn't mean she does. Still, since she's mainly dealing with transport and healing, she's been getting it a bit easier, especially recently. I guess we got a few new awakened healers. Huh, no kidding, Ben chimed in, his recent work with Mora coming to mind. Yeah. She's still been pretty swamped, but it's been getting easier on her. Gods above. I get that, Thera sighed. Even if things are getting easier, everyone is still getting hurt all of the time, just constantly. Anytime I have to treat the same person twice in one day, I just wanna... She trailed off, but her clenched fists were a good enough sign of the feelings behind the thought for the both of them, leaving a pang of pity for anyone who managed to get hurt badly enough that they needed the help of an awakened life mage twice in one day. On top of the injuries themselves, they were surely getting some rather pointed comments to go along with it. Anyway, Thera went on. I think every healer I know understands just how nice it is for things to ease up on all of us a bit, and the good news is that it should be easing up even more soon. Yeah? You guys have some crazy way to help awaken life or light mages now too? Nah, not really, Ben shrugged. But our kid was able to make a bunch of new types of spirits, one of which is a blessing spirit, so when they get a bit more comfortable with existing, that'll be some more powerful help around. I'm missing context. We adopted, Ben clarified with Thera chiming in. I don't think being dropped on our doorstep counts as adoption. It kind of does when you don't fight it. Besides, you've even stopped arguing anytime anyone calls you his parent. Ugh, that's not fair. I'm just afraid that he'll take it the wrong way if I keep insisting I'm not. Besides, we don't even know if he thinks of us as his parents, but I doubt it. We aren't even that far apart in age. You do remember he's not even half a year old, right? Mental age, you know what I mean? I'm still missing context, Will said again at the back and forth, with Ben taking mercy on him to give him the backstory while they waited for the last two to arrive. So anyway, that's the story of how we got a kid. What do you think? I think Steph is going to lose her mind when I fill her in, he sighed. That all sounds insane. That's parenthood for you. I really don't think it is, but whatever, it looks like our wait is up. With Amy and Jake arriving in the distance, one looking far more excited than the other with Jake basically bouncing with energy. The tower loomed above them and reached into the sky, waiting in that devastating landscape for its next challengers. Oh yeah, here we go, Jake yelled while Ben pressed his hands against the doors, preparing to walk through. Second last tower and second last tower blessing. Here we come. Jake, we're not even doing anything to earn this one, Amy sighed. Considering we're about to be carried through, maybe take it down a notch. Hey, in group projects, as long as your name's on the assignment, then that's all that matters. And you don't need to remind me how much being grouped with you in school always sucked. Guys, Ben cut in. We're a second away from going in, and I know this is supposed to be safe and all, but please consider the fact that I had my heart destroyed on my first step in the first floor of the last one, and try to be at least a little focused until we've actually confirmed things are as safe as they're supposed to be. Wait, what was that about your heart? Will asked, each new tidbit that came out of Ben's mouth only sounding more insane than the last, with his question being brushed off. I'll tell you about it when we're done the tower, he said, hoping the other would manage to forget so word wouldn't get back to Steph about it either. He could only imagine how that would go if he let it, and since he didn't particularly want to be left prostrating on the ground and promising to be a little safer when he had no real intention of holding true to that, the best option had become distraction, so not letting anyone else get a word in, he threw open the door and stepped inside to see what it held. His body was instantly tense for it too, a reflexive reaction after the last tower, but he didn't suffer any immediate harm, instead finding what was by all accounts a simple room. A furnace and some tools at one end and a table at the other, a few things placed on it he couldn't perfectly see from where he stood that he'd examine later, along with a few open boxes lined up against the walls, as well as a fountain at the other side of it constantly letting water flow, and finishing with a small pedestal waiting in the center of it all that he walked to first. Using the ingredients in the room, concoct a general healing potion, he read aloud, feeling his brow crinkle as he continued. Place here when complete to be judged. Well, hey, that doesn't sound too bad, does it? Jake laughed. We've got the guy who made the most important potions in the world. Sounds easy peasy. It's definitely a lot harder than that sounds, Ben said as he walked around, looking at the rest that was there. Each box was filled with a fine powder, his material sense telling him what they were thanks to the experience he had with using them out in the world for his own work, while the table was more varied, being covered in the dried clippings of what at first looked like 30 different plants, holding 2 pieces of each along with a single cup and some small spoons as well, but on closer inspection revealed the true trap they held. What's the issue then? Will asked, feeling his own interest pick up at whatever sort of challenge the room held that the rest of them were blind to, and seeing no time limit to go with it, Ben explained. The first issue is that a general healing potion is a bit of a misnomer, he explained. There are certainly potions in the world that can heal the majority of races, but there's nothing that can heal all of them. I don't think the gods would intend for me to manage to make some sort of pancreas that doesn't exist in the outside world, so the real intent here has to be to make something that would heal as many people as possible. Okay. That still doesn't sound terrible. Sure, but we then have the second issue. Limited ingredients. If I'm using the herbs on the table, then I only have one chance to get this right. If I treat them the wrong way, then I have no way to correct it, and this floor is basically done. Do you have to use it all? Amy asked as she walked over to them. You've got 2 of each, doesn't that mean you could at least do the wrong thing with each one once? Or are you going to need to use up the full quantity? It's not like the gods asked for a specific volume of potion. A good point about the volume, but as for how much of each ingredient I have, that brings us to the third issue. The table is a trap. What? How? At first glance, it looks like I have 30 herbs to use, but that's wrong. I might have up to 60. I can already say with certainty that a few of those plants are lookalikes from different species, with some being known to be outright poisonous and others having both medical and toxic uses, along with a few more that are going to be used in the next issue, not this one. Which is? Thera asked, playing along with the question she knew he wanted to ask because, despite how many issues there supposedly were, she could see Ben was enjoying himself. At that question, though, he spread his arms wide, gesturing all around him. Look around you. Alchemy isn't as simple as absent-mindedly tossing things together to get an end product. I'm going to need to powder some of these herbs, and I'm going to need bowls for storing them. I'm going to need to make extractions as well to do that too, and then I'm going to need to mix the right ratios. Test tubes, beakers, flasks, and more. I'm going to need plenty of tools to do this, but do you see any of them around? This story has been unlawfully obtained without the author's consent. Report any appearances on Amazon. No. Now that he'd pointed it out, the amount of equipment was noticeably bare. He'd been given a large scoop that could act as a container if it had to, a few spoons, some tongs, and what looked like a metal tube as well, but none of the obvious stuff any normal alchemist would have needed to take advantage of. Exactly. The gods didn't leave anything here for potion making beyond some raw ingredients, and even then, I'm going to have to make some other chemicals first, since just water isn't going to work for a lot of the things I'm going to need to make. You know what they did leave me, though? Everything I need to make glass. The gods expected him to make his own equipment as a prerequisite for the actual main part of that floor, adding a whole new dimension to what it meant to make a potion in what he couldn't help but think was a charming application of a floor that was meant to cover crafting as a whole, raising his excitement all the higher, even if the others mostly looked confused. Okay. But so? Thera asked, waiting for more in a way that brought confusion forth to his own face. What do you mean, so? This is a really interesting challenge. Isn't it? A lot more than plenty of floors we've taken on in other towers. It's got parts, it's got layers, it's dash. Something you can just materialize, she finished for him. You can make all of the equipment you need in a snap, can't you? Probably some of those other chemicals too. Okay, so on the one hand you're right, but on the other, I really want to try it the way it was intended first. Why? Funsies. Sure, he could make things significantly easier by materializing as much as he could, but unlike other trials where he would have happily cheated his way through, their lives weren't on the line. All it was a challenge, plain and simple, something he'd love to get the chance to test himself on to see just how well he could manage, and left Thera to shake her head, even if she was smiling. All right, suit yourself. In that case, we'll stay out of your way. Thank you. I'll try to be quickish, but still not as quick as I can. Of the many things stored in his rings, he had his clones as well, but he didn't want to take them out, at least not yet. Despite all he'd just said, a floor like that wasn't going to end up a struggle, it was a game. One he very much wanted to play to his heart's content as he got started, grabbing the scoop and a few of the spoons before getting a pile of sand from one box and mixing other add-ins to it with the few measurements available before pouring it all into the furnace, feeling the intense heat and leaving it to melt as he went to the table. The other real issue he faced that he hadn't brought up was that none of the ingredients he'd been left matched any pre-existing recipe he was aware of, meaning he needed to rely entirely on his own knowledge of each one and how they were used as he began mentally putting them together in different ways, trying to figure out the perfect combination that would have the least reactions among the population as possible while not only having the best healing effect but also did what the plaque said, used the ingredients in the room. He wasn't sure if he was correct to interpret it the way he was, but he took that to mean to use all of them in one way or another, and he was sure he could, feeling things come together by the time he went back to the furnace and found everything melting nicely, leaving a thick, molten mass that he began working with the tongs he'd been given. Even there he'd been left only the bare minimum of supplies, but he looked at that as part of the challenge, happy to take it on as he got the consistency he believed he'd wanted, and broke off a piece of it before adhering it to one end of the thin pipe he'd been provided and blowing, being rewarded with the sight of the glass ballooning out while he continued to work to shape it, bringing it in and out of the heat as need be as the first of his test tubes were made. Okay, I got one out of my system, now I should actually do the more important bit. What he really needed to make first were two pieces to act as a mortar and pestle, a bit more of a challenge since glass would be their medium instead of wood or stone, but he delayed himself just a little for the simple reason that he had never had the chance to try glass blowing before. Having the option at his fingertips was simply too exciting to pass up. With that attempt out of his system, though, he was able to treat the rest more seriously, shaping the rest of the glass he'd started carefully with the tongs alone. Sure, there were better tools that could be used, but sticking true to what he'd been given until it was formed to his desires and left to cool, allowing him to work on the other pieces he believed he'd need while he waited. It was only once he had everything set up, the mortar and enough bowls for each herb he'd been given, that he began breaking down each herb into fine dusts to be used for his alchemy, and transferred some into the same containers while others were left to wait as he ran around the room, adding water to the ones that would ultimately need it before going back to get more glasses of it in a pure form, measuring out some of the other box powders he'd been left to create both different acids and bases when they dissolved at varying concentrations to prepare for some other extractions as well. With that first step ready, he brought them all closer to the furnace to heat them, all of them at different distances depending on the temperature required, but most being placed beyond the reach of his comfort, leaving him to rely on the tongs to swirl them or pull them back each time a new one required a new step, with him keeping an eye on all of them once different solutions were done. When it came to a few of the plants that would normally be seen as poisons, time after time they were used as just one step in the processes. The solution using them created would be mixed with something else to pull more specific compounds before another would be used to neutralize the most toxic effects, with everything he'd been given working in tandem as different ratios were taken and mixed together, being heated again at specific times until he was finally done. Left with a potion unlike any other. Its inky black look would leave many hesitant to trust it, but Ben had complete faith in his work, swirling it in its jar and watching the thick liquid stir. It lacked the comforts of many other potions. He didn't try to make something that would be at least somewhat palatable, nor did he make something that looked trustworthy to an uneducated eye. Neither step mattered for that floor. He'd been told to make a general healing potion, and to the best of his ability, that was what he'd done, leaving only the question of if the gods would accept it. Feeling himself tense up in both worry and excitement, he walked back over to the pedestal, a sure sign for the rest of them that he was finished as he placed it down and watched as it disappeared. Not sure if that was a good or bad sign until a doorway appeared, bringing a bright grin to his face. "All right. Looks like Floor 1 has been successfully completed," he said proudly, feeling great about just what he'd accomplished. "Now, who's ready for Floor 2? He was already pushing the next door open as he asked and rushing through to the one beyond it, barely even noting the lack of a rest area that all of the magic towers had given them with his curiosity not able to be contained. The first floor had been both fun and a challenge. Certainly something he could have completed in a far easier manner if he'd let himself, but that would have cut down on some of the entertainment he'd gotten from it. Something he was already hoping he'd get again as he passed through to the next stage. With that one looking like it might be a bit easier at first glance. All around him were raw materials, metals and woods and stones and clay, with the tools to use them too, all just waiting for him to get his hands on them, with a new plaque waiting in it all to tell him the rules. Including walls and a roof. Build your ideal kitchen. Floor ends in 5 hours. He read aloud, feeling his brow crease as he did. Unlike the last floor, this one's win condition seemed murky. Hell, all it had said he needed to make was the walls and ceiling. If his ideal kitchen was just an empty room where he stored fresh fruits and vegetables to snack on, would that be enough to finish that section? He supposed it was possible, but he didn't want to risk it when there were other factors he didn't know about. What if it asked him to use it after and he was left missing a pivotal tool, making whatever dish it would want him to cook impossible to make? Or worse, what if it forced the others with him to do some cooking to satisfy the second floor of the trial? In both of those situations, he was sure he'd be able to make it work, but it was better to try and do things right the first time, and immediately got started. This time employing his magic now that there was a time limit as he looked at what he'd been given to use and began shaping it to his desires, would being reshaped into a knife block with the knives following soon after, pots and pans and cutting boards being next along with shelves to hold them all and a few other storage bits too. And then what was a kitchen without dishware? Plates and bowls were all easy and cutlery no worse, leaving him to only have the bigger items to focus on soon after. A stove, an oven, a cooler, and a freezer, all necessities to make a proper kitchen and all things that needed enchantments placed. The gods hadn't seen fit to grace him with any magic materials for power among what he'd been provided, and while anything he made could be powered entirely through one's own personal mana supply, there was no rule stating he couldn't use anything he'd brought himself, and if he was supposed to be making his own ideal kitchen, then a part of that ideal included something with a power source. It was the conveniences he just couldn't give up on. Then, with magic materials out anyway, he thought of more he'd like, thinking back to the conveniences of Earth that weren't so commonly found on his new world and finding plenty of inspiration in that as he built and shaped a mixer and blender to give himself some more variety and continued on, adding whatever little touches he felt were missing before equipment-wise, he was complete. This narrative has been purloined without the author's approval. Report any appearances on Amazon. Once that was finished though, all that left was containing it, putting some of the remaining materials to create counter spaces, walls, and a roof for his ideal kitchen, making sure it was plenty spacious to move around in but otherwise being done, only an hour being spent. Did you do something wrong? Jake asked him as he looked around. Doesn't look like we got an exit. The sign said the floor ends in 5 hours. I'm taking that as both the time limit and the soonest we can leave. And if you're wrong? Amy asked him, not seeing how he could feel so sure of that while he just shrugged. I've done exactly what it asked me to. I've made everything I'd want for a kitchen. Technically, I could add more, but at a certain point that just becomes clutter that I wouldn't want. I can't make it much better than it already is. Still, gotta say I'm happy with it. I really should make a few of these things for home too when we finish up here. But are things supposed to go this smoothly? Will asked, the only one among them who hadn't yet challenged a tower. I was kind of under the assumption that not having a real team with you would be a handicap. Hush now, don't go wishing any evil like that on me. If it seems like it's easy, that's just because I've got the advantages of high levels and extra relevant magic in the form of my material manipulation, and the ability to think 1,000 things at once. Trust me, without that last one especially, we'd still be in the first floor and probably stuck there for a couple days while I worked through every possible recipe I could think of before finding the best one. I may have made it look easy, but that thing was hard. Like, from a technical standpoint, that might have actually been the hardest first floor I've seen yet. Sure didn't feel like it though, Jake chimed in. That's because all of my efforts haven't been completely useless. If you go out of your way to learn the medical and chemical properties of every studied plant on the world while also studying enough alchemy to put that knowledge to use, you'd be able to finish it just as easily. Pass. You sure? Ben teased. We could use the rest of the time on that for you, here and now. If I just pull you into my head and make a new circlet dash. Nope, no sorry. I'll watch this foolish mouth of mine and make sure it doesn't say anything so dumb again. Jake still remembered the lessons he'd gotten on both non-affinitied magic and general chemistry. He wasn't going to let himself go through the same again if he could help it, especially not for a subject he'd literally never use. The reaction left Ben laughing though, slapping his friend's back before getting up. All right, well, since we have a while to kill and now happen to have a fully stocked kitchen on top of it, I'm going to start getting lunch sorted, so all of you sit tight. It will be ready before you know it. Having a floor that was going to force them to wait there the full time was a bit of a shame since it meant they were on its schedule instead of their own, but it also meant it was a break to be enjoyed until whatever would come next, and since he didn't know how bad it might get, he made sure to enjoy it for all it was worth until the clock finished ticking down, granting them a door and access to whatever they'd have to deal with next. All right, guess it's time to see if I passed or not, Ben muttered once the time limit ran out and a new doorway appeared. With the reassurance that failure wouldn't mean his death like in so many other towers and trials, that meant the only way to know if he'd succeed or not was to step through and see where it would leave him, with a bit of fear inescapable as he stared at it. It was something he couldn't help. That floor had seemed so simple it was practically forcing him to overthink, questioning if there was some trick to it he'd just missed that was going to dictate if he'd pass or fail beyond just making his kitchen. But if there was, it's too late to worry about that now. He sighed. All I can do is see how my efforts turned out. Based on the directions he'd been given, he could only believe he'd done as asked to the best of his abilities, leaving only to step through and see if he was right. So putting it off no longer, he pushed open the door and let himself go beyond, freezing in place the second he did. Well, that's interesting. Again, he was given no rest area. Not that he needed one since he'd been waiting hours for the last floor to end, but he'd been left completely unprepared for the new floor he'd found himself on, walking through the door only to reappear in the kitchen he'd just made, the only difference being there was now a doorway in one of the walls he'd built. The others with him were looking around in surprise as well, but he ignored them, instead walking over to the pedestal where the previous instructions had been, hoping for some guidance and getting it as he read the new goal, muttering as he did. Interesting. What? Thera asked, the first to peek over his shoulder to see the new challenge for herself before reading it aloud for the rest of them. Using the tools and ingredients provided, build a dining room with a pleasing aesthetic and prepare the best 3-course meal you can for all participants to be eaten before the time is up, with a time limit of 4 hours? The goals here seem subjective. They do, but at least I'm seeing the benefit of the kitchen I just made. Having one floor lead into another. Huh? I like it. Forcing me to live with the consequences of my last floor is a neat little gimmick. As far as trials go, I'm giving these 2 floors together 5 out of 5 stars. I don't think the gods are going to care about your ratings, Ben. They should, considering how many towers have floors that get 0. A perfect score from a certified trial hater? That's gotta feel a little good for anyone who helped make this that's watching. Okay. But maybe don't waste your time being impressed like this? Alright, yeah, you got it. I'll get this over with, so everyone just sit tight. She was right, he was on a time limit, so wasting no more he hurried over to the door and let himself through to see just what he was going to be dealing with, finding a small hallway beyond with 2 more doors each as he opened the closest and looked around the small room it contained. Stolen story. Please report. So an ingredient storage then? He said as he examined what he'd been given, with an overall reasonable selection. He was seeing fruits and vegetables and a few cuts of meat as well, along with other staples such as eggs, grains, and seasonings across a spectrum of flavors, but a good selection was only as good as the quality he'd been given. With him testing exactly that, as he sprinkled a pinch of the first spice, he could reach on his tongue and carried on from there to the others, eventually moving on to try one of the fruits before he finally stopped, with one fact inescapable. Bland, he sighed, seeing exactly where the challenge was going to lie. The flavor in all of this is so much weaker than it should be. It's like the spices are all old and the fruits were all picked at the wrong times, but this is still manageable. For now, I'll sort out the other part of this floor and come back to this when I'm done. With the second part sure to be far quicker considering how the last floor had gone. With him making his way through the next door to find the same empty expanse he'd been in before he'd made his kitchen. Only with piles and piles of materials to be used and the tools to do it waiting at the side for him to ignore. Since he needed to focus on cooking, he wasn't going to waste time playing around, and instead spent his mana to reshape everything he'd been left as wood was bent and warped to create a large table and chairs for each person before the rest was broken down into fiber and woven in. The air at his side, available dyes adding subtle touches of color as a tablecloth and placemats were made and set down. All of it with consideration for how they'd match the plates he'd made on the previous floor, since he'd been told the overall aesthetic was important, even if he didn't know how the trial was going to judge it. He began building the walls at the same time that was all going on as well. Again focusing on the overall appearance he was creating as he did by turning the stone he'd been provided into polished tiles to contain the area and considered what would be needed while a ceiling was added at the same time. Namely, lighting. The simple answer, of course, was to just make some enchanted lights to illuminate the space while they ate. He was certain he could have created some that would do the job while being pleasant in both their glow and appearance, but that felt too simple. He was in a trial for crafting of all things. He could get far more creative than that, so what he instead made were windows, creating a view into the void beyond before he changed that. On the other side of the panes of glass ended up being metal plates that he'd enchanted one by one with light magic, carefully creating a peaceful scene beyond as he replicated something from his memories, making it look like what waited on the other side was the park he used to like to draw in before he died, showing a broad grassy field with a few benches in it and a row of houses farther back. A scene of a few children at play that was consistent from one window to another as they chased each other around, and leaving him more than satisfied with the job he'd done by the time he was finished. Which means now on to cooking. Over 3 hours left for 3 courses, easy peasy. Course. Gotta make sure we all have time to eat everything too from the sounds of it, but I can make this work. In the back of his head, while he'd been constructing the dining room, he'd been thinking about the flavors he'd tasted and how he might use them throughout the entire process. Feeling the pressure there more than anywhere else. The instructions had told him to prepare the best meal he could for all of the participants, but everyone had their own tastes. He was confident in his cooking skills, and he'd been in all of their minds on more than one occasion, so it wasn't hard figuring out where their preferred flavors aligned, but then it was also a matter of matching it all to what he had to use. But before his thoughts could spiral, he slapped his cheeks, trying to get his mind in order. He was a good cook, one of the best in the world by that point, and so long as he kept away from flavors that he knew any one of them actively disliked, then he was certain he'd be able to pull together something delicious. All that there was left to do was make it happen, and with that goal firm in his thoughts, he went back to the pantry and filled his arms, carrying everything he needed back to the kitchen to finally put that room to use. All right, 3 courses, nice and simple. Appetizer, main, and dessert. The classic trifecta, so let's get this started. Even without pulling out his extra bodies, he was doing multiple things at once. Pulling out pots, pans, and cutting boards with his magic, while knives seemed to do their job by themselves. Peeling and chopping ingredients for future use, while spices and seasonings were measured out into different bowls at the same time, with his first task being focused entirely on preparing everything he was going to need for when the cooking itself actually started. In the kitchen, timing was everything. Food couldn't just be made in the order it was going to be served. The temperature each dish was eaten at was going to be just as important as the flavors themselves, leading him to focus on the final course first as he got started on the dessert. While pots boiled in the background, concentrating some of the weaker flavors of the ingredients he'd been provided, he used his magic on the ones he was going to need sooner than later to speed it along, applying his extraction enhancement to rip away some of the water of various juices to create thicker, more flavorful syrups before mixing them together and letting it fill the base of a large, thin sheet tray before carefully placing them in the freezer to be worked more once they cooled down. part of the goal for the last course being to make a sorbet. Since he'd be able to keep it frozen, it made for a perfect dessert to add some flavor to the other part. A dish he'd be able to leave at room temperature, as his hands and magic had already begun making a cake to go with it. The destructive aspects of his material manipulation, turning the various grains he'd been provided into an instant flour with the recipe from their simple sweetener, oil, a few seasonings to complement the sorbet when the two would go together. None of it was a challenge, with the only minor issue he had on that front being a matter of leaveners. One solved just as easily by breaking up the eggs he'd been given and using every point of strength, speed, and stamina he held to whisk as much air into them as possible before folding them into the rest of the batter and then into the oven from there, letting it cook while he moved on to the next dish. With that spot going to the main course with another meal that would keep well on the heat until it was time for everyone to eat, the target that time being a rich stew. Ordinarily a dish that would take the better part of a day if he wanted to really impress. Once more the magics he held created options for him that would have the cooks of his old world shaking with envy as he first directed his power to the meat he'd been provided, using his destruction once more but in a far softer touch than the last as he used that magic to tenderize it first, instantly reducing the cooking time of the tough cuts he'd been given and moving to brown them a bit in a pan while at the same time building up the broth they'd be cooking in, making sure the flavor profiles of the fruit and vegetable juices he'd been reducing matched what he'd expected and adding more seasoning when he deemed it appropriate before leaving them on the heat for only a few moments longer while he went to work on the final vessel it would all be cooked in. Even though he would be able to get the time it would take to make down by employing his magic while he cooked it, he still wasn't sure that would be enough, and to make sure he had every second he could get, he modified the pot, applying some complex enchantments to it to speed up the time within it to make sure it would be perfect once they needed to eat. Considering that the previous floor had been for designing his kitchen, perhaps modifying it on the next was cheating, but he didn't care. He'd been told to make his ideal kitchen, but nowhere in that ideal was there a time limit for how long he'd get to use it, and what good was a cook if they couldn't adapt? Sure, usually adapting meant substituting an ingredient or two, but he was fairly comfortable saying that making a new appliance applied as well, and with that sorted he added all of the ingredients to the vessel and placed it over the heat, next moving to prepare a new dough, wanting a flatbread to have with the main once it was ready and leaving it to the side to cook closer to the end. With that drawing ever nearer. He had well over 2 hours left, but he was going to let the stew cook under the power of his enchantments for one of them, and then they still needed time to eat, but that was plenty to work with as he began what would be his first course, wanting a flavor bomb to start the meal off and deciding to match his own cravings while he started making it, with the appetizer being a round of dumplings. Taken from Royal Road. This narrative should be reported if found on Amazon. Gyoza to be specific, or at least his otherworldly equivalent, with more flour being made to start the wrappers for it, flattening and rounding them out quickly before putting them in the fridge under a damp cloth to wait while he focused on the filling. With plenty he could make use of. The juices he'd extracted for the last 2 dishes had left him with plenty of fruit and vegetable pulp he could use and skin still to zest that he started cooking down together into a jammy paste before turning to another cut of meat, grinding and seasoning it, and given him time to work on a sauce once that part was done. He didn't want the meat cooking yet, so he needed to let his paste cool first, creating the chance for him to consider what flavors would complement the end product the best. A selection of them. He ultimately decided. As far as things go, we'll keep it simple though. Something sweet, something salty, and something tangy. That should work for choices. Not one of those was particularly difficult either, with the only matter being deciding just what flavors to put into each and how thick any sauce would be, but once they were all done he was able to move back to finish up the core of the dish itself, mixing the fruit and vegetable paste into the meat before taking out the wrappers and spooning some into each one, crimping them closed and leaving them to the side until they too were finished, only needing to be fried for a few minutes for them to be ready to eat. With plenty of time still to spare. He grinned to himself while he started cleaning up, throwing the waste into the garbage and wiping down the counters, only for Jake to speak up. "Man, if you're done early then take a load off." The sign didn't say anything about cleaning. It's a good habit though. Plus, now that I've had one floor connect to the previous one, I need to be prepared for the next one to connect to these two. Don't want to risk coming back into a messy kitchen. Ignore him, Ben. Amy sighed. He could stand to learn a thing or two about cleaning up after himself. We literally have maids and butlers at home. If I clean up after myself too much, then they'll be out of work. They really won't be, but whatever. It's a bit late asking, but is there really nothing we can do to help at all? Just sitting here watching is kind of... It's fine, he told them. It's not like I haven't sat back and watched for plenty of tower floors myself. All I need you guys to do is enjoy the meal in about an hour's time. True, Jake laughed, plenty happy with the thought as he joked around. But you sure you have it tasty enough for us? Can't make it any better? It was said in jest, but it sealed his and the other three's fates as Ben's mind flashed to that floor's instructions with questions springing to his mind now that he wasn't entirely focused on getting it done. Taste is about as subjective as it comes. Isn't it? Same with aesthetic too. Both things this floor is supposedly measuring, but if the contestants themselves are eating the meals they've made, then doesn't that mean it might be judging through them? I know the trials can interact with challengers' minds. Is whether we win or lose going to be based off of how much any of them like it? He had no clue if he was right in thinking that, and no way to test it either, but now that he'd had the thought, he could not try to make sure things worked in his favor if that was the case, with a way to do that bringing a happy grin to his face that sent shivers down everyone else's spines. That's a really good point, he said. And while at this point I don't think there's anything I can do to make the meal taste better, all of you actually can. Ozdech. Will asked, as worried as anyone else about where Ben was going with it, but too trapped in that tower to get away before chunks of steel flew from his rings and reshaped themselves around everyone's bodies to make heavy metal vests. Ooh. Exercise, Ben explained, having no thoughts about their comfort when the priority was finishing the trial. Food does taste better when you're hungry and we've got plenty of time to kill. Push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, whatever. You all have attributes above 1,000, so it might be hard, but do your best to work yourselves to exhaustion for me and build up those appetites. I'll make sure it feels all the more worth it once we sit down to eat. Ben? Buddy? Jake asked. You're not being serious right now, are you? He didn't need to answer for everyone to see that he was, and considering it was the only bit of work they'd been asked to do until that point, none of them found themselves about to turn him down, so with a few glares sent Jake's way for opening his mouth in the first place, all of them got to it, exhausting themselves for the meal to come. Sweating and panting, Ben alone looked fine as he watched from the side while the other four moved their bodies for whatever workout they could get, suffering through it for the vague hope it might help ensure that they'd get through that floor of the tower, but finally getting it to end once Ben called out. All right, guys. I'm gonna take the dishes out in 10 minutes, so you call all stop for now. Oh, thank God. Jake sighed as he collapsed to the ground. That sucked so much. Jake, I know your attributes. That should have been a light workout. I'm a mage. I don't do light workouts. Well, anyway, you're not exactly done either. Boo. Will, did you just boo me? When I saw you outside the tower, you told me I could sleep through this. Yeah, and don't think I didn't notice you having a couple naps on the first and second floors. Now, what I was going to suggest was that Thera, could you use some life spells on everyone to enhance their digestion rates? We'll get you all just a bit hungrier and then we'll get to eat, promise. Well, this is still far from the worst trial we've done, she told herself as she did what he'd asked. Feeling her body grow hungrier on top of the effort, she just finished putting it through while the others groaned and their stomachs rumbled. Perfect. They were officially in peak eating condition, which meant he just needed to add the finishing touches, pulling his frozen syrup from the freezer and turning it into a fine powder before placing it back and putting the dumplings in a pan to cook with a bit of water and oil, sending the rest of them to take their seats while he started plating everything, carrying the appetizers out for everyone and being rewarded with hungry eyes as a result, placing a dish in front of each person before taking a seat himself. All right, everyone, dig in. They needed no prompting as the first morsels were shoveled into each mouth, with one change coming to that floor as they did. As the four of them bit down, a mark appeared above each of their heads, forcing Ben to look above his own in surprise but finding nothing there. What does that mean, though? He could only guess that they were either a positive or negative mark. At the very least, they didn't seem to be doing anything other than existing, but he had to assume that the absence of one for himself meant he wasn't getting a perfect score. Either he alone had satisfied the floor's conditions or everyone else had. But that doesn't make sense because I think this is delicious and it's obvious they all do too, and another tower's broken for me, hasn't it? If this stupid thing is supposed to be gauging my mind, then it might not be reading it right, and oh my god, Nair. Fix these things for people who think like me. Seriously, why am I constantly being discriminated against for my mental structure? But this is a genuine problem. I don't know if I need a perfect score or not, but if I do, then I've already lost, and even if I don't, 3 courses probably means 3 marks each. Failing every single one is not going to be a good look, so is there any way I can turn this around? The tail has been illicitly lifted. Should you spot it on Amazon, report the violation. He still had food left, so he did his best to control his mind. Mediation was one of the skills that Unnatural Mind had grown from, so in an attempt to try and trick the trial and make his thought structure seem more normal, he quieted all but one of them and ate another gyoza, with no change coming for it. With only one other option he could think of, he then went the opposite route by placing his very first mind skill in charge, the focus that had grown so far beyond its initial limits being directed at all of his minds to hone in on experiencing the dish he'd made, tasting it with all he was, and finally getting marked for it as a result. Oh, thank God. It wasn't how he liked to think, but he could make the trial work for him. That was all that mattered, so he let the others finish eating before he got up, their hunger having their eyes glued to their plates in a way that none of them had even noticed the small problem he'd just gone through. All right, stew next, so in the meantime, Thera, enhance their digestion as much as you can while I'm gone. You're a monster, Jake whimpered, with Thera seeming to fall into agreement. Did you get a level of your evil affinity for that? No. You should've. Ha! Maybe I will when I get you to do the same thing before dessert, he teased. Now sit tight, I'll be right back. He dished out the stew into separate bowls and heated up the flatbreads he'd made in a warmed pan before carrying them all back. Seeing hungry enough faces on the rest of them for him to know that Thera had given in to his request no matter how she may have felt about it, and was rewarded with the sight of them devouring what he'd made once more. Each of them being marked and getting his own as well now that he knew the trick of it, leaving only dessert last to give. Thera was increasing their digestion again while he left to get it, cutting thick slices of cake for everyone and scooping a healthy amount of sorbet on the side and carrying it back, not even getting to take his own seat before they were digging in. The 4 of them marked and left, only waiting for his own to join them as he took his first bite, sinking into the delicate flavors and texture of his cake against the sharper, fruitier ones of his sorbet, and not needing to see his own mark to know he'd passed. When his food touched his lips, he saw the door he'd come in through change, a sure enough sign they'd gotten their exit, but not something they needed to immediately take. Their time limit was far from over, and with food still in front of him, it would have been a shame to waste it, so he and the rest first finished up, all of them looking content by the end. Ben, I gotta say, even if you're an evil bastard, you're still one hell of a cook, Jake sighed. Sure I can't hire you? Not when your way of asking starts with calling me an evil bastard. I'm literally the sweetest little guy. I'm still having chemistry nightmares. Just learn how to shove your mind somewhere else. It's a handy talent to have, and gives you a lot more time to get things done. You still need a therapist? Amy told him, shaking her head at the thought that anyone should develop a coping mechanism quite like that. Plenty of people do, it's fine. Now, if everyone is done saying rude things to the guy carrying you all through the tower, and who just cooked you one of the best meals of your lives, let's go see what's next for us already. He was already excited for whatever it would be, curious if the next floor would build on the last 2 again, or if there'd be some new, fun challenge comparable to the first one, but pushing his way through he got none of that, leaving his face to fall even as the others rejoiced. So we're getting one rest area at least, Thera said, obviously happy to have it since it meant a place to sleep without being on a time limit, and even if Ben wanted to skip it, he had to admit it was probably for the best. While his current tower was supposed to be harder than any of the magic ones, by that point any other team who challenged it was sure to be sore from how much work and running around needed to be done. If he assumed that the rest areas in the magic towers were to mainly let people regenerate their mana for whatever would come next, Craftsman's Tower had to be to give an ordinary team's bodies a break. Not that I really need one, but I guess I don't know what's coming in the next 2. A nap might do me some good, just in case. It looked like that was what everyone else was going for too, with the others starting to lie down, taking out what bedding they had in their rings as he did the same, grabbing his spot beside Thera and retreating into his mind for what rest it would bring, letting a few hours go by before they'd have to move on. When he'd felt 4 hours pass, he opened his eyes, happy enough with the break he'd gotten. In the years he'd been on that world, he'd grown used to functioning on less and less sleep, his high stamina making it easier too. But while he'd been expecting to prepare some more food while the others rested for a little longer, he found a pair of eyes already on him, Thera watching him from his side. "Ha, this is a surprise. Not often you're up earlier than me. I might have taken a small nap while you were playing around on the first floor," she admitted. "I'm pretty rested. And you? Doing okay?" "I'm thriving. You don't have to worry about me. This is enough to make me wish I could challenge this tower a second time just to try out some of the different floors or doorways too. It would be cool to get a chance to take on everything the crafting gods cooked up." "Ha! I think this has to be the most positive I've ever seen you be about a trial," she teased. "All of the practice doing them's finally softened you on the experience? Hey now, I love a good challenge when it's not trying to kill me. If it weren't for the fact that I really need the rewards for this, taking this one on would just be a game for me. Even getting the chance to repeat it once or twice would have been fun. I'd have loved to see how fast I could clear a floor now that I know what I'm doing. I'm willing to bet every one of them so far is finishable in 20 minutes or less, so long as I go even harder with my magic right from the beginning and cut some corners on the meals. I did the best I could for those ones, but there's no way I couldn't have made some options that would have been quicker, especially combined with the starvation strat. Ugh. Don't remind me. You're still crazy for making us do that when you don't even know if that affected anything." "But I also didn't know if it wouldn't affect anything. I'd say it was worth the chance if it helps make sure you all get your levels and blessings. I think you were just being a worrywart. I've gotten to enjoy some of the best food in the world growing up thanks to my mom's position, and you're still leagues better right now. You can never leave me because I wouldn't be able to go back to eating like that. We can work on improving your cooking too. You know? MMH. Let's keep that as a maybe for if the world doesn't end." "Ha, sounds good, but speaking of, I only got up to make sure everyone has a meal before we do the next one. You down to give me a hand?" Immediately weaseling in some cooking lessons after I tried putting it off? Very sneaky. And yet, we all gotta eat. Come on, it will be fun. Getting up, he offered his hand before pulling what he needed from his rings, the two of them whispering and working together while the others still slept. Fourth floor. What do you have in store?" Once everyone was rested and fed, all there was left to do was go on. The door to the next challenge right in front of him, and with a single look back to the others he pushed it open, his heart pounding in excitement when he stepped through. Not another continuation of the last 2 floors, yet similar to both of them. He once more found himself in an endless void, with only a pile of tools and materials taking up space within, another pedestal sitting in front of it all. So another construction floor then, he thought to himself as he walked over. 3 floors that deal with that theme seems like a lot, but considering how much it's expecting us to make from scratch and how different building things for a kitchen is from building things for a dining room, it's been an interesting way of applying different crafting skills and techniques in every single challenge. Even if similar, there'd been plenty of variety to be found in the other 2, and his excitement only rose when he read the new instructions, getting one he felt more at home with than any other. Create your ideal workshop. Time limit of 3 hours. Interesting. This book was originally published on Royal Road. Check it out there for the real experience. What that implied to him was that, in the same way as the previous 2 floors, his current one was going to be paired with the one coming next, forcing him to use what he built to reach some sort of end goal that he couldn't guess at. There was plenty one could make in a workshop after all, even more if it was going to be like the previous floor and ask him to make another room at the same time, but all of that was a future problem. With a time limit lower than even the last one, his focus needed to be on the task at hand. After all, as much as it would drive me insane, this could technically be a trick. Force me to do the last 2 and see how they're connected, and then give me this one to make me think I'm going to have to use what I build for whatever comes next, and then give me something completely different to mess with me. I don't think Nair's the type, but there's other crafting gods in the world I know nothing about. It's plenty possible some would have fun setting things up like that. Hell, I know I'd be laughing doing something like that. He'd just need to hope that none of the crafting gods shared his sense of humor while he got started. Looking at all he'd been given to use and creating multiple models in his head to decide how he wanted his end product to look. As fun as it would be to see how much he could do by hand, By that point it was obvious the gods expected some magic to come into play. There was no way to get everything done otherwise. He'd been given the basic of basics as far as tools went, but just looking at the low quality of all of them meant he was going to need to remake those as well, creating a far longer list than anyone would be able to pull off through pure muscle alone. But that was to his benefit as metals, woods, and stones all flew through the air around him, warping as they went to fit the shapes he'd need. An anvil and forge went down with a tool rack by its side, filled with different hammers and files and tongs, while a different area got a workbench with finer tools placed in the drawers he'd made it. Knives, saws, and scissors all had their place, as did the storage room in the corner, with plenty of the materials he'd been given to make the workshop being divided up and placed in there as well in case they'd get to see some future use. There were a million little things that he'd want any workshop to have, and he never stopped making them, adding more and more cabinets and drawers to hold them all in redundancy for every item for his clones to use too, while his mana slowly dwindled, his massive supply and regeneration rate not quite able to keep up with the work he was doing. But just before he emptied his pool it was finished. Yet another floor complete. "All right, that wasn't so bad," he said, pride in his voice as he looked around the room at all that he'd made. It was clear that Fox Shop had been a heavy inspiration for him, but he'd gone beyond just recreating the familiar building, creating a bit more space for the overall floor plan while neglecting to recreate some of the Yeti's tools that didn't match his smaller size, filling the space with more that he himself could use through whatever homunculi he had on hand. And as he walked it he couldn't help but feel like he'd perfectly captured some of the goal of that floor, even if he still had loads of time left. "Ben, my guy, as nice as seeing you thrive like this is and all, you're killing me," Jake complained as he turned his gaze to Amy. "Do we just suck at towers? Are they supposed to be this easy and we've just been taking days each time because we're losers? Feels like it. Guys, chill. I'm just in my element," he told them. "Hell, I'm thriving. God, all towers should be like this. The rest of them have too much bullshit in them to bloat them out. I feel like there's a lot more bloat in these ones than others," Thera pointed out. "You're just not noticing because you're having fun." "Okay, well yeah, maybe, but the fact that I'm having fun is making all the difference. That's exactly what every other tower is missing then. Aren't they supposed to be challenges?" Will asked. "I think them being fun would defeat the point. Who says challenges can't be fun? In fact, I'd say plenty of the other towers would be fun too if they just took out the murdery bits. Seriously, why does anyone have to die for the chance to grow? It's messed up." Considering what he'd read of some of the pre-invasion worlds that made up the ancient history of all of the races of that one, he chalked up those violent aspects to be artifacts of the past that just hadn't been removed, back when the gods ruled over people whose days would be filled with nothing but the struggle to survive. Now though, or at least before their current invasion, food and shelter came easy and at least some leisure could be a part of most days. The fact that the gods were having them risk their lives at any point only showed their primitive roots. Well, maybe it also has to do with Nair being a god of challenge too. I'll have to bother him at some point about how many of the more murdery bits were his idea, he told himself. But for now, he still had time left and his mana was returning after all of that work, leaving him to start spending it to materialize substances of all sorts that the trial hadn't seen fit to provide itself, adding a few magic materials and other precious metals to his storage closet with the time he had left. After all, if he didn't know what he'd be doing next, then it didn't hurt to try and be as prepared as he could be. The exit came as the time ran out and passing through revealed the very thing he expected, leaving him in the same workshop he'd just made, with nothing looking out of place to his eyes. When he'd entered the third floor there'd at least been a new door, but with nothing else there on the fifth. The only thing he had to go off of was the plaque at the side of the room, and feeling eager he hurried over, reading the new instruction and instantly feeling his mood drop. "Ben?" Thera asked, able to see the instant change in him. "What's the matter? What's it say?" "In 12 hours, using whatever materials you can access and only the skills found within your soul, create a high legendary item. Is that a problem?" Thera asked him. "I mean, I know that would be hard for other people, but you've succeeded in that before." She wasn't seeing the issue that was making his knuckles crack from how hard he was squeezing his fists. None of them were. He'd made high legendary items before, even if only a few, but a task like that seemed well within the realm of possibility for him, if not for one thing. What the specific phrasing of those instructions meant and the fact that of all of the craftsmen in the world, They would have only been put there to get in his way alone. Only the skills found within your soul. An instruction that was basically outright saying they wouldn't accept results if he enchanted anything with the help of his deep connection. An instruction that couldn't have been placed more than 5 years ago, considering how recently his god had created the skill, and one he doubted had been added before he'd first started to express interest in taking on that tower, blocking off one of his key abilities in a challenge that basically demanded it. Why? Why was every god in the world constantly finding some new method to get in his way no matter what he did for the world and how he'd compromise for them? Was it so obvious that he was going to breeze through the rest of that tower that they had to make sure he'd fall right at the end, or did someone just want to spit in his face and found that to be the funniest way to do it? On the very last floor, did the gods of the world get a kick out of taking a challenge he was sure he could overcome and dropping his odds down to nothing with just a couple extra words? Because that was the real issue there, one he couldn't escape. He'd been making legendary items for a while now, and even a few high legendaries as well, but he'd never once reached that upper ranking using nothing but the skills he'd grown within his own soul. He didn't even know if he could. His greatest strength was the variety he could access, something that not even the other Connect holders had reached, let alone the other enchanters of the world. But when it came to the abilities he'd cultivated within himself, did he have enough that he could achieve the highest mortal level of craft? He had 55 skills total, 18 of them were awakened and 7 he was a contender for, but items of that ranking were normally the realm of the third tiers. It was why his teacher had told him when he'd first started learning that people who could reach that level appeared once a millennium. He was sure he had what it took to reach the lower or middle parts of that spectrum, but to get to the top, no, he told himself. I can make legendary items already by myself. By that very fact, I am a once-in-a-millennium talent. I can enchant as good as a third tier, and of the skills I hold, I'm a master of most of them. It doesn't matter if the gods wanted to try to screw me over with this once more, or if they have some other reason for doing this. All that matters is finishing this tower and putting them in their place. 12 hours? That might as well be years to plan this out. I have all of the time in the world. He just needed to decide what item to make and what enchantments to put on it, and with his rage already pushing him in one specific direction, all that mattered was refining it as he took a seat on the ground and brought his thought speed to its maximum, retreating into himself for what plans he could make. 3 hours later he opened his eyes and jutted up, his first sign of movement in that time that caught the attention of the others as he finally got started, pulling the homunculi out of his rings and filling each one with his soul for the task ahead. The narrative has been stolen. If detected on Amazon, report the infringement. Since the other part of that floor's instructions said he could use whatever materials he could access, he wasn't shy about pulling from his rings as the tables around him filled with magic materials while others went right to the forge, heating some up for future use while others were divided under his magic for later. One of the clones he was working through started to fold and hammer the red-hot metal, the first blow ringing loud through the room with the strength under it, his ill intent enhancing all of his attributes to unseen heights that warped the metal beyond anything he'd intended, that one mistake needing to be fixed while the rest of him continued on with other tasks. Certain alchemic enhancers were ground up into fine powders to be folded and blended into different metals, while crystals were cut to shape with every part of the item he was making, a knife, being constructed at once under his many hands, redundancy on redundancy being created for the weight of the enchantments he intended to place. With 9 hours left, he had more than enough time to remake it again and again if it came down to it. While metals were being worked, turned into alloys of mithril and orichalcum for the magical effects they'd bring, one more was added through materialization, the faith stone he avoided making out of consideration to the gods being born of his mana now that his care had run out, while crystals that would make up the blade's handle were each given souls, different bits of knowledge placed in each one by connecting to them, making sure that skill was applied in every other way it could be to spite the ones who denied it. Once the blade was shaped and the hilt added, each crystal was placed over the tang, fitted together to create a grip that he held tight at its end, his true body sharpening it to a razor's edge before applying every enchantment he wanted it to have as the complex system he worked with went down. His material manipulation was placed to ensure that the blade itself would be strong despite the thinness of its edge, and his crafting contributed to that same fact as well. His mind skills were bound to it for what extra power they'd give its handler, letting them think faster and with more minds than any typical mortal, while unnatural inspiration went into it to affect their subconscious thoughts. There for the benefit such things could give combat as well, and strengthened even more for the ill intent the blade was drenched in, buffing the holder's attributes so long as it was properly wielded with the intent to kill. Given the inspiration behind the blade, just how ingrained the sacrilege enchantments were would shock no one either, but to a greater extent than any of that was the interplay of deep connection running down every inch of the knife itself. Soul crystals had obviously been placed to give the wielder more mana if they needed it, but the designs were far more insidious for anyone who faced it, with that skill being just as good for ripping a target's mana from them as it was any blank soul, while also carrying over the things he'd imprinted on them, certain ones holding every pain he'd been put through since coming to the world for the mental attack it would be for those it would stab into, and more from there. His personal system, the enchanting modifier and the magic modifiers had all been employed, but his newest enchanting spell had found its way in as well, the factory enchantment being stripped down and minimized to the farthest extent he could in order to make something that would apply self-destructive spells from his magic into a target's bones should the blade make contact, with even more sacrilege mixed in as well, leaving the final part he squeezed in combining his magics together to materialize metal pins when activated. Something to be left behind in whatever flesh the knife found itself in that would be powered by its own victim's mana. Every drop of anger and spite he'd built up for the gods over the years went into it, and the second he was done, what shocked him wasn't the fact that his eyes showed that he'd pulled it off, a new high legendary item in his hands, but that it held it all under the magical strain he'd created. Every single effect had a weight, and with both a materialization and a factory spell on that single small item, he'd had to use every bit of skill he'd claimed for himself since coming to the world, with the notifications going off in his head being his reward for new levels for his achievement, each of them greatly desired, but he didn't get the chance to reflect on what they meant for him. He'd completed the tower, beaten every challenge it had laid out for him, which meant it was time to claim his reward, with a god appearing to give him exactly that. "All right," Nair said when he arrived. "Before anything else, I'm going to politely ask you to stop pointing your little god-killing knife at me. Excuse you, I didn't just create this for it to instantly get misidentified. This is specifically my god-torturing knife. The fact that it will kill you eventually is really just a side effect. Now, since we're buds, I'm going to give you the chance to explain yourself before I leave and destroy the tower. Last time I had to settle for forcing one of these things into a higher layer of reality, but this time I think I'll at least test to see if creating foreign matter will help do the job at all. Well, I appreciate the chance to explain things first, since it was obvious from the start things were going to go poorly, so let's get the most relevant part out of the way first, shall we? This was the decision of the collective crafting gods. Even if you failed, we were still going to give you the tower rewards. I'm listening." He lowered the knife just a smidge to a slightly less threatening angle, with Nair looking somewhat more comfortable for that fact as he went on. "It was pretty clear to myself and Myriad that you focused in on the fact that we were denying you the chance to use Connect here, but Ben, did nothing else strike you as odd?" "Nope." I dived in pretty quickly into my murderous rage. "I'd really prefer if you weren't so inclined to do that. And I'd prefer if the gods of this world didn't make trying to screw me over a hobby. Now out with it." "Fine, fine. Think about the quality we asked you to achieve. Upper legendary? What about it? Ben, I may have warned you in the past that the challenge for this tower is incomparable to the others thanks to the lack of danger, but it still needs to be possible. Ignoring how insultingly easy you made the other floors seem, stop and think about it. Does it seem reasonable for a challenge to have people trying to reach the mortal limit of item quality?" It was a question that sent his mind whirling, with the answer instantly obvious. No, he'd been too focused on the part that seemed to specifically apply to him for him to notice, but that was blatantly impossible for even a full team of awakened crafters to hope to pull off. Even if he'd personally challenged it at the 8th awakened level, not everyone would, when not just anyone even had any hope of getting that high in the first place. Plenty of awakened would find their skills stalling at the Zeroth or first levels and take on a tower with people in similar positions to themselves, but expecting a team of Zeroth level awakened to pull something like that off would be outright cruelty. A taunt to anyone who came that far, basically telling them that they never had a chance to begin with. "Alright, I'm not sure if you think telling me that is supposed to somehow make me less angry, but please go on," Ben said, the tip of the knife raising just a little while Nair sighed. Remember the first part where I told you that even if you failed, we were still going to give you the reward? Consider that and put the knife down already, would you? As I'm sure you can imagine, for the actual challenge we don't care about if you use Connect, and for you at least, it would be easy enough to complete it that everyone up here knew you'd manage it because of the skill you've shown. The real challenge for this floor is to create an item on the high end of ultra rare. Something that would normally be difficult enough for anyone when they'd have to stick with only the supplies that were given by the trial or brought with them while working in a space the challengers only had 3 hours to build. The point of raising the difficulty for you in particular was to prove to all of us watching that you're worthy of a far rarer reward in addition to the standard ones given for completing the tower. Something I've long been advocating for, I might add, but with others needing a bit more convincing, ending things like this. That finally got him to lower his knife, letting Nair breathe just a little easier as the promise of some additional mystery reward caught his interest enough to at least reduce his anger to mere annoyance instead. He trusted Nair. If the gods said that they were going to give him the standard reward whether he'd succeed in the challenge they'd set for him or not, then he'd believe it, even if he still wasn't thrilled with how it had been done. "All right, you've got me. What reward?" Ben asked, with Nair grinning now that the mortal's curiosity had been piqued. "A chance," the god told him, "in the form of the quest. Perhaps an impossible one, but still one we crafting gods hope to see completed. Ben, all of us here want to witness a mortal succeed in one thing that until now has never been done. Go beyond legendary. Make a mythic item." Those words instantly left his heart pounding at the thought. A mythic item, something that until that point had been purely within the realm of what gods could create. As soon as the god had said it, Nair knew he had him, but it didn't stop Ben from asking questions first, not immediately accepting, even if he knew he would in the end. "Are you allowed to do that, though? Offer me a quest?" From what I've understood, that was something that gods give their believers, and I don't worship a crafting god. It's uncommon to the point that you wouldn't be aware of it as a mortal, but there are a few groups of gods that offer, shall we call them great quests? Quests that, by all accounts, are going to be impossible yet still have a sliver of hope to pull off. There aren't many of them, but for the rewards offered, no god will get in the way of their believers being on the receiving end of one. Of any divine group who's given one of these to a mortal, none have yet seen success, but that doesn't stop any of us from hoping, and you, showing that you can single-handed create a high legendary item when not even at your full potential nor existing in the 3rd tier yet, have shown that you're the one worth placing our hope on in this generation. And the reward? You say it's basically impossible. I hope the payout is worth the effort. "Oh, I'd say so," the god told him, his smile deepening. "You remember how strong I've told you a tower blessing is?" "I do, about the strength of 10 standard blessings, right?" "Correct. All of the gods associated with the tower contribute some of their blessing to it, but should you succeed in creating a mythic item, on top of the fame and titles you'll undoubtedly get for it, the blessing you'll get from the tower will be strengthened, growing to the point that it will be worth the full blessing of every crafting god on the planet. Did you know this text is from a different site? Read the official version to support the creator." "And how many is that?" 98. Essentially 10 tower blessings if he could pull it off. Even if it was impossible, he didn't need to think. It was a chance that he wanted, and with it right there in front of him, it was impossible to deny. "I'll do it. Of all the mortals I've had the pleasure to watch over, there's none I've believed in like I do you. Live a long life, Ben, and I'm sure you'll make all of us proud." He could feel a hidden meaning in those words. Nair, one of the gods of the world, he'd told that he expected he might have to die if their war was ever going to end, but he left it at that. Whatever time limit he was on, he'd continue to work as hard as he could, and if there was any chance to use the time he had to grow, then he'd take it, with thoughts and ideas instantly filling his head for how he might succeed before the god pulled him back from them once more. "And now for your current reward. I know you prefer getting your blessing first, but spare some thought about just what you want your level to go towards." "What I want my level? Wait, the entire point of this was to get my Connect to its 9th level, and I just did that, and crafting just got there too. What am I going to spend a free level on?" With his mind instantly pondering that, his thoughts rang out with the sound of notifications, the blessing given with more growth coming with it. "And your skill level?" Nair asked with a knowing smile. "You did ask me a certain question before about this, I assume you believed there was a chance the levels you'd wanted might come with your blessing and you'd need another choice. Nair was partially correct. He had let himself hope that his connect would grow with the new tower blessing, and if it did along with his crafting then he'd need another option, but the god was wrong in the one he thought Ben would pick. Having it confirmed that they'd awaken an unleveled skill for him, Nair was sure that Ben would choose to raise his artisan's touch, and by all accounts, that would make for an excellent choice. It was basically an inclination that was above the 9th level but below a second-tier skill. Awakening it would create a new skill that should have been the equivalent of an inclination that was between the end of the 2nd tier and the beginning of the 3rd. Considering that anything else he had that would likely qualify as a crafting skill seemed to only be his esoteric actualization, his soul source, and perhaps even his soul affinity for awakened ones or his extraction enhancement and material sense for his first-tier skills, he would have said Nair was right too. Awakening Artisan's Touch would instantly make leveling and even awakening any of his crafting skills leagues easier. Not just to the 2nd tier, it would likely help him reach the 3rd in some of them. Certainly it would be a big step in the quest he just got, with the only thing holding him back being one other skill he held, with the only question being if it even counted as a crafting one. Before that, Amy, do me a favor and see if you can get the level for your combat skill, Ben said, wanting to know if his efforts to get her to treat it like a crafting skill had been enough and being rewarded for it with the notification going off in her head telling him as much, instantly bringing a grin to his face as he felt his own odds of success instant grow. It still wasn't certain. He'd gotten her to use her skill for crafting directly, while what he wanted to try to raise affected things that affected his crafting, creating a couple more degrees of separation, but it didn't matter. If he was told it wouldn't work then he'd go with what Nair expected of him, but despite everything, his status said he was a craftsman, through and through, and he felt confident of that fact. Sorry to disappoint Nair, but we're only going to be taking the one you're thinking of if my actual choice fails, he said, getting to see some curiosity slip through the god's face as Ben named a skill Nair had never once heard him talk about. It's unleveled, so awaken my modifier compatibility. An unknown skill needed to be tested with a drop of faith, but it became clear instantly that it went through, with a loud ring of notifications being his reward. Ben-Nair started, the question instantly on the tip of his tongue as one of only a handful of gods who had access to his mind to hear all of the notifications that just went off in his head, but was silenced by Ben placing a finger to his lips, a broad grin behind it. "Shul later," he told the god. "For now, there's some other things I need to sort out first, so if everyone here is done, it's time for us to go." He'd got what he'd needed and more from completing that trial. All there was left was to start figuring out how to put it all to use. "So, that went well for you guys too, I hope?" he asked. Not that he'd need to. He'd listened in their heads when blessings were handed out and skills acquired, with Will getting levels to all of his blessed skills and more, while he already knew Amy had been able to level her weapon skill, with Jake managing to see some growth in his Tier 1 options. And as great as that was for them, more important was the fact that Thera had gotten her level to her earth magic, placing her as a contender for it now too, on top of levels in her magic affinity, her life and dark sense, and her dark sight. In his ideal world, she'd hopefully succeed in awakening her life magic to the 3rd tier, and then could work on trying to raise her earth magic to that level as well, but he knew he had to keep his expectations in moderation on that front. He already knew well how impossible getting even a single 3rd-tier skill was proving to be. He was probably the only person motivated to try and claim 2 for himself in such a short time. Still, he listened as everyone shared what they were willing to, even if all eyes were obviously on him from how it turned out. They may not have been able to tell what levels he'd gotten, but it was clear something had happened in there, with one reward feeling more blatant than the rest. "Dude, I am so incredibly jealous," Jake said while practically hanging off Ben's shoulders. "A secret quest? Does it get cooler than that?" "I think the word impossible is more accurate than secret," he pointed out. "But you're still going to try." "Yeah, obvious. Did you hear what I get if I somehow manage it? I pull that off and I'll be even more blessed than you." "Ugh. But I worked so hard to be one of the most blessed guys on the planet. I can't believe you're just going to swoop in and take that from me." "Point of clarification, no you really didn't," Amy cut in. "You worked adequately for it at best, and Yuliel carried us through the first couple towers. We did pretty hard." "Hey, we helped. And we did a lot more in some other towers, just look at the ones we took on without them. Come on. Be a little jealous with me, it'll feel good." "Why?" Even if we were given a quest like that, we'd never have a chance. You know there's no way either of us can make a mythic item, right? Sure, but it sounded like there were a few other extreme quests. Who's to say there isn't one that we could pull off? Jake, look me in the eyes and tell me you have the attention span for something like that. Okay. Well, while they're doing that, I've got a question too. We'll cut in. What's modifier compatibility, and why'd that god look so surprised when you took it? That. It's a long, secretive story, but if you can be free in a couple days, I'll let you know. If it's only for a couple of hours, I can make that work. Why? Because I want to give the big reveal when everyone's free. Speaking of, Amy, when's the soonest you two plus Yuzu can give me an evening? I'll make some dinner. We'll have a real celebration for completing the tower. We can do it in 2 days if that works for everyone else. We typically get a little bit of time after finishing a tower, so an evening shouldn't be too much to ask for. Perfect. Will that work for you and Steph too? I'll make it. Will nodded. We're due for a hell of a break. Excellent. Then everyone meet me at the Magic Towers Adventurers Guild then, and I'll take you all for a hell of a dinner. Just you wait. And then all of your secrets will be revealed? Jake laughed. Some of them at least. It's kind of hard to keep a secret when I've invited someone with no qualms about looking at people's souls. I feel like I need to point out that you matched that statement too, Amy said to her girlfriend's defense, getting a shrug in return. Stolen novel. Please report. Sure, but I also have the good manners to not mention the things I see. Anyway, evening 2 days from now, be there. With that said, they made their way back through the ruined city to the gate, all of them going separate ways with Ben and Thera passing through Analia, his girlfriend cozying up to him as she grabbed his arm and walked through the streets. So, waiting to hear about why you decided to awaken a skill you've never bothered talking about before doesn't apply to your beloved girlfriend too, does it? Ha! Feeling that curious? Obviously. You have so many other skills that would be worthwhile. You could at least give me a hint. Sorry, you're going to have to wait on that, but in its place, I'll tell you something just as fun. I don't know, my curiosity's going to be pretty hard to beat. Even if I were to say that I just awakened 5 other skills, he told her, the grin on his face stopping her in her tracks before she shook her head. You're ridiculous. I believe the word you're looking for is incredible. Maybe handsome too if you're feeling flirty. No, I know what I meant. How is that even possible? I mean, I know tower blessings are incredible and that you must have at least been close for all of that to happen, but still, what were they? Artisan's touch, extraction enhancement, material sense, defense enhancement, and absorption resistance, he said, feeling no need to correct her on what had been the driving force behind those awakenings and deeply aware of the changes that had brought. The most obvious was how deeply he was feeling the materials around him now thanks to his material sense and his extraction enhancement too, but that was far from all. Materializing a small ball of mithril in his pocket cost him close to nothing thanks to the mana cost reduction that came from Artisan's Touch awakening to Artisan's Soul, and as for his 2 defensive skills, he'd need to do some testing, but he already felt strangely safer. Taking out his Death Stone and Morabugel bands, he could feel that the previous effects they'd had on him, sapping his mana and vitality, were both essentially gone, meaning he was going to have to find a way of enhancing them when he got the chance to continue to passively train those attributes, but all in all he couldn't have been more thrilled with how things turned out. Hell, my defense enhancement even got the divine prefix. Looks like getting my heart destroyed continues to pay off for me. Still, he went on, since we're celebrating, what do you say we do it at your family's place? We can get them involved. Ask Fontesh to look after Mora for the evening, so we can relax a bit too. Sure, that's fine with me, but why are you feeling so festive about this? She laughed. Have you ever wanted to celebrate a tower like this before? No, but this is almost certainly, probably, maybe the last tower we'll ever do. It's a big one. It deserves some celebration. Ha! True, I guess, and how can I deny you when you carried me through this one? I'll mention it to my family when we pass through. I'm sure my mother will love any excuse she can get to try and blow off work. Great. And now, as your cute little worn-out boyfriend, can I ask an itty-bitty little favor? What's up? Well, I can't help but notice a bench over there, and a cute cafe on the other side. and I might be a little bit more exhausted from all of that than I'm letting on. Any chance I could talk you into grabbing me a snack and a drink while I have a small sit down? Ha! Not often something wears you out like that. Sure, I'll be right back. I love you so much. You better. While she walked off, Ben took his seat, closing his eyes and thinking at the sky above. Well, Myriad told him. Torturing. It was just a small threat. I feel a little bad about it now given how things turned out. Or at least I would have if making that hadn't gotten me those levels. Finishing it turned me into a contender for 3 more skills at once. His god went on after a pause. Cool, and Hellori isn't up there bothering you about it too? Ha, good to know. For now though, I think I really just want to rest my eyes a bit after all of that, man. If we could save any more talking for later, I'd appreciate it. Thanks, buddy. He felt his god leave his head, and he instantly dropped the mood he was presenting now that he was fully alone and with his eyes still closed, looking asleep to the world. He followed a path, forcing his mind to a higher realm. But not Myriad's. No, while it was the same sort of endless space, there were at least decorations of sorts in that one to fill it. The area he was seeing crowded with books and shelves to hold them with one goddess at the heart of it all, too invested in her work to notice his arrival. Hellori, he said, watching her jump and speaking up again before she could utter a word, the seriousness in his voice dampening her surprise. I need a favor. With food and drinks out of the highest caliber for all to enjoy and decorations to raise the atmosphere even higher. The atmosphere of the party had been good from the start, but it was only as one guest joined, forcing Ben to his knees in penance, that couldn't help but raise the moods of every person who'd wanted to see as much for the chaos he was so prone to cause, with Steph standing above him. Ben, she asked, sounding more like an angry mother than an old friend. What's this I've heard about you having your heart destroyed? Who's the jerk that ratted me out to Will while I was busy getting us through the tower? I thought I'd managed to deflect away from that after everything that happened in there. Okay, well you see, it's kind of a funny story, he started, only to stop as he looked up and felt the weight of her glare. There's nothing funny about almost dying. Honestly, we both know you're stronger now than when you first got here, but the 2 of us still worry about you. None of us that came want to see any humans die, but why are you the one who keeps coming closest? How do you think the rest of us will feel if you end up getting yourself killed just because you want some power? Yeah, I can already see this day ending up bad for me. Far too many of his plans were at least somewhat self-destructive, and considering the endpoint was something he still expected to die for, it was only going to get worse for him if she kept being told every time something happened. But on the plus side, if I die before any of that, I'm free of any future scoldings, so that's a silver lining, right? I can feel you thinking something dumb right now, Ben, she told him, glaring down and tapping her foot in displeasure. As the only mind reader in the room, I'm comfortable saying that's just your lack of trust speaking, but just as importantly, do you really want to spend the first bit of time we've had to hang out in ages being mad at me? He asked her, giving her the widest, most innocent eyes he could and finally getting her to relent. Fine, get up already. I'll save my real scolding for the next time you almost get yourself killed. How about the time after that instead? Don't push your luck. Still, everyone else had enjoyed the show, and with her small piece said, she walked off, grabbing Thera's arm to catch up with her while Will came to his side. You had to have known she was going to say something. I didn't know anyone explained what happened to you, you traitor. Ha, don't shoot the messenger. Besides, she's not alone in worrying about you. I think everyone in this room just wants to see you live a nice, long life. Hey, if that was an option, then I'd be the first to take it, but look at the world we're stuck in, man. Strength and safety go hand in hand. You need the first if you want the second. And that's part of why we worry about you, he said, flicking Ben's nose. Your supernaturally bad luck on this planet has seriously warped your perspective on just how far you need to go to get that strength. Then that just means I need the strength all the more to handle that luck, but seriously, don't worry so much. Attribute-wise, I think I'm going to be higher than most of yours by this point. And yet, despite that, I've never had my heart destroyed. Which is for the best, Ben laughed. You're a lot less equipped to deal with it than I am. Ha, it doesn't matter, I wouldn't end up in that sort of situation to begin with. Anyway, I'm gonna say hey to Carly. See what she's been up to. Join me? A with circumflex knew yes. Ah, maybe later. There's a few others I want to talk to first. With a party going on, it was important to mingle, and so he made his way over to Lux and her partner Rit, the first watching the other absolutely devour a plate of food. Ben, my boy, this is probably the best thing I've ever had, the satyr told him before thinking better of it. Actually, scratch that, it without a doubt is. I'm going to be remembering this meal for the rest of my life. Did you really make all of this? Ah, I just whipped it up quick, but glad to see you're enjoying it so much, he laughed. I just got a new level to my crafting, but the difference in skill is already showing. If you opened a restaurant, you could charge a fortune per plate and people would buy it. I've got to believe this is how people who've tasted the divine chef's meals feel. God. I'm not there yet, but maybe one day. And Lux, you're having a good time as well. It's lovely, Ben. A bit of normalcy among everything else going on. It's a good chance to take the edge off. A party was a splendid idea. I'm glad you're liking it. Hope you don't plan on leaving too early now. I know Thera at least would love the chance to talk with you. Oh, we'll stay for a while. How could we not when he's enjoying himself so much? She said, her gaze back on Rit, filled with love while he unceremoniously stuffed his face. Ha, great. I've got a few more people to say hey to for now, but I'll be around, so if you get bored, come back to me. I can introduce you to a few others here too. She nodded as he said it, seeming perfectly content to watch her lover eat his fill and leaving him to make his way to the next group, with Jake and Yuzu just parting from their own conversation. Perfect for him to swoop in to get some of their time for himself. Hey guys. Amy isn't with you right now? Not making sure she's feeling the love. The events of the non-affinity tower had left Yuzu in particular clinging to the other girl when he'd last seen them together, but they both shook their heads. Ah, she's catching up with Carly, and well, I guess right now, and she's told us to cool it on the public displays of affection. Jake shrugged while Yuzu giggled. She can be so shy when she wants to be. She's such a cutie. I'll take your word for that. And Yuzu, big thanks for not shaking me the second you saw me. You can thank Amy for that, Jake laughed. We knew something big happened in the tower, so when she arrived, she was already holding her back. Speaking of, can we finally learn just what the skill you had awakened is for? Let's place that on the back burner for just a little longer. And Yuzu, mind if I borrow you for a bit? Something I wanted to talk to you about with Thera. Oh sure. Jake, go mingle too. You can't just be stuck to me and not see any of your other friends. Yeah, you got it. And make sure you eat your fill. Ben chuckled as he offered his hand. My crafting went up and I wasn't limited by poor quality ingredients. If you thought my food was good before then, eating this is going to practically be a religious experience. Can't wait. Jake laughed as he took it, his face changing to subtle confusion as he felt Ben place something in his palm but not getting the chance to say anything as he immediately turned away, bringing Yuzu with him. So what did you want to talk about with me and Thera? She asked him as they walked over to where she was sitting, chatting with Steph on one of the couches in the room. Oh, it's mostly that I want you to talk to her for a bit while I deal with something. Don't worry, he said. Only for 10 minutes or so. Okay. But why? Well, he connected to her as he trailed off, making a request and watching as her eyes widened. A question immediately on her lips that she didn't get to ask as he placed a finger to his own. Trust me. Okay. Yes, I can do that. Thank you, I owe you one, he told her, looking serious for just a moment before they reached the couch where the two were chatting and put a bright smile back on his face as he picked Thera up from her seat in the middle of it to put her on the other end, getting a golden blush in return. Ben, we're in public. Ha, yeah. Sorry, I just needed some space, he said as he materialized a thick blanket to place on her lap before laying down between them, resting his head on her thighs while kicking his legs up onto Steph's. Try not to mind it too much. I need to deal with some apostle stuff is all. It won't be long. Just make it quick. She gave in. I can feel my parents watching. 10 minutes tops. And with those parting words he pushed his mind up to his god's realm, finding only two there, both of them hard at work as Myriad noticed his arrival. Ben. Finally finished working yourself to death, have you? In the 2 days since he'd finished the tower, he hadn't made time to go up, finding excuses to put it off as he placed a focus on spending time with Mora during the nights and training Delaire during the day on top of some other chores and leaving him to shrug. What can I say? I've been busy. Well, at least one of them's here for you to finally explain why you awakened what you did, so you can suffer for keeping that skill effect from them with me. I'd like to point out that you are literally the reason I haven't brought it up yet. We don't need to focus on that part. Anyway, I think it's pretty clear how curious she is. She was trying not to be so obvious but failing. Hillori's eyes were locked on him in what Myriad was seeing as curiosity. Unaware of the favor Ben had asked her, circling her head as it had been ever since he'd invaded her realm. Yeah, of course, the goddess said. So what's this skill do anyway? Oh, so it's something I got when I took Soul Mage as a job, and it increases the effect my modifiers have on me. Jobs, titles, inclinations, and blessings, so awakening it strengthened that effect further, which is why I got so many levels and awakenings and skills after taking it. What? She yelled. Thoughts of his favor instantly vanished from her mind in the face of such outrageous news, but was put to a stop before she could plunge into it deeper, with Ben holding up a hand. The author's tale has been misappropriated. Report any instances of this story on Amazon. And I'd be happy to talk about it with you more later, but for now I actually came to have a bit of a private talk with Myriad. Do you think you could give up a few minutes alone, please? What? Ugh. She vanished from the realm in a fit of frustration, being told something so tantalizing, only to be asked to leave before she could question him, all but maddening to a knowledge goddess, while his god watched on in amusement. I'm surprised she listened after what you just told her, he chuckled. I didn't think she had the restraint. How well I appreciate it, he said as he jumped up, taking the goddess's spot perched atop his god before laying back down, head resting and arms stretched out. And I needed it anyway. I'm here for some spiritual guidance. Really? Really? Then of course, Ben, what do you need? The cube asked him, sounding far more serious now that his apostle was asking him for help. It's just, I've been talking to people, and the question of how far I'd go for power has come up a bit as a theme. Not surprising considering what you've gone through. Is this a question you're actually starting to consider? Honestly? No. Think I have a good grasp of what I'd do for power and what ethical lines I'm willing to cross, but I know that some of them are going to upset the people around me too. What ethical lines are you going to cross? Oh, don't worry. This isn't about that right now. I'm not going to go murdering anyone who doesn't deserve it. Yes, but the issue there is what you believe might deserve it. Please tell me this isn't going to end with me hearing that you're finally going to try and murder Aneth, Olencia, or Duna. What? Myriad, as much as I'm annoyed about Duna getting in my way like she did, that's not on the scale of any of her believers trying to kill me. It would only deserve a death sentence if killing the other two wouldn't be enough to awaken my sacrilege. Bin? Myriad groaned, his thoughts warping to scenes of major interfaith conflict while the apostle who seemed doomed to drive such a thing forward only chuckled atop him. Relax, that's not what I'm talking about anyway. We have a good few months before I resort to trying that. That doesn't make me feel better, the cube huffed. But fine. If your more murderous plans are going to be delayed a bit, then what's the problem? Despite what anyone says, I'm a pretty lucky guy. You really need a better frame of reference before saying things like that. No, I'm loved by a lot of people. People who get mad at me for being so careless with my life just to become stronger or more skilled or to reach my goals, but less than a year to try and reach the 3rd tier for 2 different skills. There's a good chance I'm going to have to put myself through hell. Hell, there's a good chance that as I get more and more desperate, the things I try could kill me, and as one of those people who care about me, I've got a nobody. Risking it all to try and save this stupid doomed world, no matter how beaten and bruised it leaves me. Is that something you can forgive me for? Not as a god looking at their valuable believer putting themselves through the ringer, but as a friend. Ben, while I don't always agree with your methods or conclusions, I do believe your heart is in the right place, the cube said after a moment's thought. I see how hard you're working for this planet constantly. How could I ever hold that against you? Thanks, buddy. I really needed that. The two sat in silence for a moment, Ben feeling his god's cold metal body pressed against his back and under his touch before taking a long, slow breath. welling all of the courage he had to do something he knew might kill him before doing one of the first things he'd ever been forbidden from, and with a flicker of will he connected to the god, touching the cube's divine soul with his own and ripping apart everything he was as he did. Name: Ben Hef. Race: human. Titles: Apostle of Myriad, the Forgotten One, Miracle Maker, Skill Learner, Enemy of Aneth, Trial Defier, Trial Breaker, Godslayer, Monster, Madman, God Killer, Threat, the Mad Apostle, Destined Holder of Connect, God of Destruction, Creator of Life, Awakener, Maniac, Brutal Blacksmith, Defier of Gods, Title Holder, Enemy of Valencia, Great Teacher, Student of Helori, Myriad's Monster, Outsider Slayer, Demigod Slayer, Transgressor, Destined Holder of Mental Symbiosis, Destined God of Alien Thought Structure, Destined Holder of Soul Production, Job Holder, Destined Holder of Actualization, Enemy of Duna, Demon Slayer, World Slayer, Demigod of Growth and Gain, First Human God, First of the Faith. Jobs: King of Intelligence, LV-99. Previous jobs: Apprentice Craftsman, Craftsman, Priest, Enchanter, Mind User, Magic Item Maker, Magic Weapon Maker, High Enchanter, Fractured Mind User, Tree Tamer, High Craftsman, Apprentice Mage, True Mage, Tank, Heretic, Adventurer, Divine Heretic, Kin, Master Craftsman, Master Enchanter, Scholar, Connected Enchanter, Infernal Craftsman, Marksman, Destruction Mage, Material Mage, High Material Mage, Profane Enchanter, Master Material Mage, Impious Creator, Mind Master, Master Adventurer, Otherworldly Craftsman, Material Creator, Master of All, Ritual Enchanter, Holy Craftsman, Cursed Item Maker, Actualizer, Summoned Enchanter, Destructive Craftsman, Soul Mage, Freak Mind User, Unholy Thinker, Polymath, Alien Mind, Soul User, Soul Master, Evil Soul User, Soul Defiling Gardener, High Actualizer, World Killer, Connect Master, Abysmal Connector, Master of Destiny, Hive Brain, Divine Enchanter, Inclination Master, Slayer, Judge, Holy Adversary, Title Master, Beneficiary, Divine Kin, Multiversal Material Mage, Expert, Body User, High Tank. Attributes: A Vitality 10824. A Vitality Recovery Rate 592 per hour. Mana 29861. Mana Recovery Rate 2815 per minute. Strength 8694. Agility 3302. Stamina 18541. Intelligence 153,975. Affinities: Light 3, Life 2, Fire 4, Water 3, Air 4, Earth 2, Death 3, Dark 1, Space 4, Time 5. Resistances: Light 68, Life 72, Fire 75, Water 69, Air 66, Earth 81, Death 78, Dark 85, Space 63, Time 61. Blessed Skills: Unending Crafting LV9*, Divine Enchanting LV9*, Eldritch Mind LV0**, Passive Skills: Evil God of Sacrilege LV0**, A Bind, Integrated Demonic Body LV9, Divine Defense Enhancement LV0**, Perfect Absorption Resistance LV0**, All Affinity Resistance Enhancement LV9, A Bite Enhancement LV9, Piercing Resistance LV9, Artisan's Soul **, Unnatural Intelligence Enhancement LV7**, Blood Regeneration LV8, Unending Extraction Enhancement LV0**, Soul Affinity LV7**, Tier 2 Modifier Compatibility **, Deep Material Sense LV0**, Flavor Enhancement LV5, Balance Enhancement LV7, Soul Expansion LV9, Defiler of Ambrosia.
Destruction Affinity LV7 astérisque.
Evil Affinity LV7 asterisk. Soul Resilience LV8. Defense Inclination LV4. A Vitality Enhancement LV3. A Vitality Regeneration Enhancement LV3. False Ben. Integrated Divine Body LV5. Mithril Blood. A Mana Enhancement LV2. A Mana Regeneration Enhancement LV2. The Strength Enhancement LV2. The Stamina Enhancement LV2. Bludgeoning Resistance LV1. Agility Enhancement LV0. Flesh Regeneration LV0. Fracture Resistance LV0. Active Skills. Stealth LV2. Deep Connection LV9 asterisk. Cycling LV3. Marksmanship LV9. A Material Manipulation LV9 asterisk. Swimming LV3. Dance LV2. Hive Mind LV9 asterisk. Rule Bender LV1. Aim LV9. Esoteric Actualization LV7 asterisk. Soul Source LV7 asterisk. Condemnation LV9. Mind Break LV0 asterisk. Realm Access LV0. Blessings. Myriad's Blessing. Analia's Blessing. Hilori's Blessing. Galwax's Blessing. Elvit's Mana Regeneration Blessing. Enetha's Blessing. Earth Pantheon's Blessing. Life Pantheon's Blessing. Dark Pantheon's Blessing. Olencia's Blessing. Nair's Blessing. Yuzu's Mana Regeneration Blessing. Witness of Chaos. On's Blessing. Fixtha's Blessing. Passive Pantheon's Blessing. Duna's Blessing. Jagel's Blessing. Non-Affinitied Pantheon's Blessing. Crafting Pantheon's Blessing. Trials. Trial of Analia and Talona. Trial of the Dead God. Earth Tower. Life Tower. Dark Tower. Non-Affinitied Tower. Craftsman's Tower. The instant the connection formed, Myriad felt it and shot away with all of the power he held, throwing himself from his apostle as the boy hung there in the air before he righted himself, giving an awkward smile as he did. "Well," he said lightly, "that didn't go quite as expected." "Ben," Myriad asked, caution thick in his voice, "are you okay? Do I not seem okay?" He asked, perking an eyebrow to match his slanted grin, with the answer Myriad could see from the part of the boy that was in his realm being a hesitant no. By all accounts, Ben was normal despite the notifications they'd both heard going off in his head, with no immediate change to be noticed for them, but that was exactly what was wrong. Ben's mind skills had just reached the 3rd tier, but his inner thoughts felt almost the same to the god. Almost. Even if it still seemed to be the apostle he knew, what he was experiencing felt more akin to what one might expect from a deep-sea fish, the mind he was being allowed to witness more akin to a bead of bioluminescence to trick anything foolish enough in, unaware of the horrors behind it. Because horrors there surely were. His mind couldn't have not been changed by the experience. Everything he was dictated so. Not only had his unnatural mind grown to impossible new heights, but his reconstructed alien thought structure had merged into it. A skill that took the aspects of each alien mind it touched, and it had just been imprinted by the structure of a god. And worst of all was how Ben was handling it, like nothing had happened at all despite that change by its very nature having to have been so much bigger than what happened when he'd brought his mind skills to the 2nd tier. He'd been practically broken by then, needing Myriad's help and constant hours of work to get him in a state where he'd be able to once more manage his own existence, and the fact that the same hadn't happened for whatever change he was hiding seemed outrageous, with the answer falling to one of the different skills that had merged into it. "How long did it take you to manage however you just changed?" the god asked, watching his apostle's grin deepen. "Less than a second. You know what I mean, Ben. How long did you perceive it to be?" With unnatural thought speed merging into the skill as well, and while at the 9th level at that, there was no doubt that its own growth had been equally as outrageous. When Ben looked at the world, just how long could that fraction of a second have been? How many weeks or months or years of time had he spent getting his mind in order, with his apostle giving an exaggerated sigh before shrugging? "Okay, you got me, but I really don't know. Doing that drove me insane for a bit. It was pretty hard to get my mind back in order. At least a couple months of perceived time, though." "A couple months?" the god trailed off, Stop hiding it already and show me. You sure? I don't think it's going to be good for you. Why? Because weaker minds can be strained when confronted with stronger ones. He was about to retort but stopped mid-word. He could see Ben was being serious, the lessons of that fact engraved in the boy's psyche. One of the first things he'd ever tried to do with Connect was link with Myriad, being stopped and warned of the devastating consequences of such a thing, and one of the first applications of the skill he'd found for himself was to use his mind to kill any bugs that were bothering him, with experiences only growing as he did. Since then, he'd used nothing but the power of his thoughts to kill any demons he encountered, and he had been on the receiving end of the minds of the great spirits before he'd adapted to them, and now he'd finally felt the mind of a god and had it to compare against his own. If Ben was saying that his mind had grown to the point that it might harm myriads, he had the experience to back that up. But the god wouldn't be dissuaded. Harm didn't mean death, and his apostle had just taken 2 very big steps into godhood. He needed to understand what had happened, and seeing his god wasn't backing down, Ben obliged, revealing everything he was to the cube and watching that higher being flinch back for it. The narrative has been taken without authorization. If you see it on Amazon, report the incident. Ben had always been talented with his mind, and he'd had a good idea of its workings from the start. Each thought in his head were threads that twisted together to form powerful minds, the number of each growing with his skills to create mighty ropes of consciousness, things that might occasionally fray but not break under the forces they were exposed to, but that explanation for his mental structure ended there. Given what he'd chosen to present after his new awakening, it was clear enough he still had the power to recreate such a mental structure if need be, but Myriad was no longer feeling threads or strings or ropes. Dividing the boy's conscious into separate minds was no longer an apt description, with all of it instead being replaced by a black hole. Pure thought condensed to a singular point that wanted to suck in everything around it. What even happened here? The god asked, more to himself than anything else, but Ben gave an answer, seeming as unbothered as he had been from the start. A bit hard to fully explain. Obviously my thinking powers exploded, and your mental structure's been incorporated into my own, but the biggest change is probably that there's no longer any distinction between my conscious and subconscious minds. That feels far from the biggest change here. You'd be surprised. How cryptic that wasn't lost on the god, but it wasn't the point then, when there was still such an important question he needed to ask. And you're still you? Always have been. I'm being serious, Ben. I don't think I'm even capable of understanding some of the changes you've just gone through. Are you genuinely still you, or is the mind you're displaying being used as some sort of model to act like the person you were? Because with the scope of change I'm seeing, that feels far too possible. Both, he admitted after a second. I am me. I will always be me, but I'm now thinking in ways I don't think anyone without this skill is capable of, he said, raising a hand to his side and bringing up the mystery spell he'd found in the archive that bore the touches of the same one that had brought him to that world. Mana modifiers? I'd need to do some testing to see if I'm right, but I can immediately understand this. It's a terraforming spell, by the way, with some inputs needed based on what form of life you want to evolve, on what exactly you're terraforming, but otherwise it's basic. The summoning spell was still a lot harder, but I understand it now too. I'm confident I can cut parts out to reduce the cost, which only leaves trying to improve it. You just know this now? After all of the days and weeks and months you've spent studying it. Because of the days and weeks and months I've spent studying it, he clarified. All of that effort made this possible. The increase to my mind just wrapped it all up in a nice little bow. That doesn't matter right now, though. What does is this. I've changed, but I am still Ben. I'm still your apostle with the same goals and desires and ambitions. Well, mostly the same ambitions, considering that what I had been trying to awaken doing that was my connect, and I hadn't had the slightest idea that my sacrilege would grow too. PFFF. Well, it was a dumb idea, all the more so for doing it to me of all gods. Yeah, I see that now. Connecting to you seemed like the best at the time, but as a being born from multiple gods and the totality of a species, I can only assume your mind is more alien than most, which probably caused me a lot more harm than if I'd chosen someone else. Still, considering that you specifically are my god, defying your will and transgressing into your mind is likely the final push that got me to awaken my sacrilege. Honestly, though, after how much effort I'd put into raising it, the result feels almost anticlimactic. Myriad had stopped listening, his focus driven elsewhere with a single word his apostle had just said. "Oh, empty skies, Harm. Your body must be dying down there." Myriad screamed as he went to look, with Ben waving his concerns off. "You don't need to worry about that. I'd asked Hellori to distract you so you wouldn't be suspicious, but right now I'm attending a small party with Thera, Steph, Lux, and Yuzu. Hell, Jake's there too, so maybe he's helping as well. Hopefully all of the healing spells I'd shoved into his head aren't gonna waste." Either way, another change that seems to have come with this is that despite being up here, it looks like I'm still somewhat aware of my body now. I'm in rough shape, but I'm being healed. Rough shape is putting it mildly. I can see you're absolutely coated in blood. I guess just placing a blanket on Thera's lap wasn't enough. They're all going to be real mad when I go back down there. Either way, it doesn't matter right now, we actually have a far bigger problem. Oh, falling stars, what? I wasn't expecting to awaken my sacrilege doing that, and the name is more than a little suspect. Combined with the fact that my awakening was going to be obvious to everyone in the room, given how my body had to have taken in the mana around me, and given the way Yuzu likes to be nosy about what's going on in my soul dash. He was cut off in an instant as Myriad's realm was filled, gods on all sides of him screaming at each other and holding one another back as he finished his thought. Any god watching her was going to find out what just happened. Taking a moment to think and freezing the world around him as he did, Ben took in the situation he'd found himself in, feeling out his options. It was obvious why they'd come, with some wanting to put some sort of stop to him now that he was the holder of a very unfortunately named third-tier sacrilege, while others were there to his defense, with both groups matching less than the opportunities they presented, letting Ben getting the chance to view hundreds of that world's gods through the lens of his new power. When he'd first awakened it to the second tier, one of the most immediate changes was that he'd found himself suddenly able to gauge the weak points of the gods around him. Not able to do anything with that information, of course, but having it available, and that ability had only strengthened with his new awakening, with the instinct attached to it telling him something else. If he'd needed to, based on the abilities he knew he had, he could probably hurt them. That, in itself, was a major change. As he currently was, without any practice, he didn't know if he could win, but in a one-on-one or one-on-two situation he could definitely put up a fight, with a few of the truly weak gods not seeming like they'd be the ones to come out on top. If it came down to it, and those who'd invaded the realm really wanted to try to somehow eliminate him, he could at least catch them off guard enough to kill one to make them suffer for that choice. But as things stood, that was all he could do. What he needed was time to explore his new abilities to understand their strengths and limits if he was really going to put them up against the gods, and he knew he didn't have that. Even with the new extremes his mind could move at, he knew the gods around him could change their frame of reference when interacting with the world as well. Not the extent they could do it, but that lack of knowledge meant he couldn't start trying to test his new limits right in front of them, lest they took it as a threat. So ultimately it looks like this needs to be settled peacefully-ish then. He accepted, letting a part of himself lower back down to the speeds the gods around him were currently existing at to listen to some of the screams and shouts that went up, with some more vocal than others. "We've accepted this for too long," Ineth yelled. "Because he's shown some use, we've given him pass after pass, no matter what twisted skills he's earned, but now none of you can deny it. The system itself has named him as an evil god. What more do you need before we can finally come together to strike this blight from our world?" The system's naming sense means nothing of a person's character, and while I do know that plenty of you are fools enough to not know that evil can be a rather subjective topic, there's plenty of other interpretations to be made as well, Analia said in his defense. "Just look at all of us here. You in particular, Ineth. Don't act as though you and I wouldn't have fought to the last had we been born on the same world, to leave the victor proclaiming the other as evil. Our philosophies are far too different for there to have been any sort of peace that can exist like now thanks to the society we've built here. Ben has his own way of doing things, but much of that has involved directly helping the world, and now you'd see him die for his achievement. An achievement that he wasn't even trying for," Myriad said in his defense. Neither skill he awakened was what he was attempting to raise, but the fact he still managed it is a testament to his talent. Besides, since it is a skill that can leave him in conflict with the gods, Analia is right. No matter what it had been named, you all would have viewed him as such anyway, thereby being the authority to make the world view him as such. If the system called him this, it's just as likely that it's because you were all planning on labeling him as an evil god from the start. Pretty words, but that doesn't change the point, Olencia sneered. Whether he meant to awaken it right now or not, it doesn't change the fact that he's been actively trying to anyway, and what he'll do now that he has it. Look at him and his constant demands. Do you really think he's not going to try for more now that he might be a threat to us? Something has to be done. But what? Ben asked, speaking for the first time and forcing all side arguments to drop as he tilted his head. Tell me, all of you gods in such a rush to see me die, what exactly will you do? Kill me and ascend me to godhood instantly? I'll tell you right now, before you can find a way to deal with me up here, I'll cause enough havoc to drain you all of as much faith as I can. Imprison me then? With the skills I hold, it would be interesting to see if you're able to find a prison that can hold me. Trying to break out could make for a fun little challenge. So then is the main option banishing my soul to hell? Who knows, maybe that will work, maybe it won't. There's only one way for you to all find out, so who's going to be the one to take the plunge and try? Just remember, if you fail, I'll know exactly who among you did it. He spread his arms out as he said it, practically inviting them while at the same time gauging each god in his line of sight, looking for any signs of movement or reaction as one he didn't know spoke up. Love this novel? Read it on Royal Road to ensure the author gets credit. Don't be so sure you can't be contained until a real solution can be found, you're guiltless. Ben cut him off, hearing scoffs that he ignored. Look at how I've gained all of my sacrilege levels. The majority of them came from killing the forbidden gods, and I got all of your approval to do it first, and of the ones that didn't come from that, I got some from destroying the tower of a careless god that's not even alive anymore and by harming a demigod who threatened me and attacked the woman I love, along with making sure their church paid for it. Hell, looking at it from that perspective, the only one of you I've ever really harmed is Aneth. Even Olencia and Duna, two who either got in my way, had believers who've tried to harm me or have outright threatened me. I've only asked of them enough compensation to try and make sure they wouldn't do it again, so really, the only god among you who matters that I've done anything to earn my sacrilege levels is my own, with my actions against Myriad getting me my first two and my last. Myriad, do you hold any of that against me? Of course not, his god scoffed. Then it seems the only one who's been unfairly wronged by me doesn't care. Now, I don't know what the point of all of you showing up like this is, either trying to put me in my place or just posturing, but it doesn't matter. Hate me for demanding equality and fair pay from all of you. Deny it how you want, but it's obvious the biggest motivator behind all of this is your bruised pride for not having a mortal just absent-mindedly obey you, but whatever you lot are trying to get out of this by coming here to threaten my existence. I'm not standing for it. I am the apostle of Myriad, and the world is richer for my work. Try to kill me if you want, but the second you fail, I'll make sure the planet knows just which gods decided to kill the man making the equipment that's been saving lives each day. Aneth started, instantly cut off for a bigger shout. Me! Ben yelled, revealing a fraction of his new mind to scream as much with his thoughts too and watching the gods before him flinch. That's right, let's not play games. The last time I quit I was told you were all thoroughly informed of how important my work has been for the planet, so let's make this simple. If you're here to threaten me into acting a certain way or behaving how you see fit, then I refuse. If you're here to extract promises from me about what I'll do in the future, or how I'll use my skills or coming godhood, then I won't give any. And if you're here just to make a point, then here's mine. Like it or not, until this war ends you need me, and I've done no wrong so great to justify this reaction, so let me make this clear. Go back to your realms now, or I swear before my God, I'll become the evil one you seem to fear so much. You think we fear you? Olencia spat, a retort already on Ben's lips that was stopped as a different god spoke up. Enough, Fixed said firmly. All of you, enough. We've spoken of actions that would divide the world before. We are not starting a war between us to kill a single boy. However you feel about him is not the problem right now, or have you all forgotten the state our home is in? Leave, all of you leave this realm and drop this matter. You all know there aren't enough among you for anyone to stand for his murder, so go back to where you were and focus on your work. Everyone, cool down before our next meeting, or else the stress you're all causing is going to leave me to quit too. An unexpected outburst from one who was normally among the calmer gods. There was grumbling, but with it clear that those who called for Ben's death were in fact outnumbered. They all left, one by one. Despite how some there felt about it, Fixed was right. No matter the demands behind it, a minority of voices couldn't insist on the death of another god's believer, let alone one who would be joining their ranks, and once those opposed to Ben parted, those who favored him slowly left as well, saying a few words of congratulations or at least giving him nods until there were only 4 remaining in the space. All eyes on the unexpected one who'd stayed behind. Fixed, his face covered by his stone hands, took in a long, deep breath, holding it for just a moment before letting it slide out of him in a heavy groan, and dropped his arms back to his side, acting like none of that or the previous outburst had just happened as he spoke. Apostle Ben, allow me to congratulate you on your achievement of being the 3rd mortal to have awakened 2 skills to the 3rd tier in their lifetime, no matter what controversies one of them might hold. While there's sure to be more than a few complications surrounding this, well, I'd like to believe cooler heads will prevail, so if you could try to not let the rash reactions of a few of our more, shall we say, passionate deities affect your actions, then I would appreciate your efforts to keep things slightly calmer for myself personally. Sure, Fixed. As long as nobody tries to kill me, then I won't go out of my way to test the limits of my new skill. Thank you. Then I dash. But there's one more thing, Ben rushed to say before the other could leave, seeing the god's energy instantly drop before he could explain himself. It's nothing bad. I finished my job with this, so I'm ready for the next group, but I was hoping you could arrange the one after to be on standby, while we see if the changes in me will let me get through them even faster. If they do, then we can work on getting the rest of the 3rd tiers done, and I can move on with my life. If that's all, then of course, I'll make the arrangements and let Myriad know. With his mind even more powerful than it had been, in theory it should have been even easier to finish any job so long as he was in a party with a mind user, but he had something different in mind to test so long as a few other little experiments worked, but all of that was for the future. With his new mental state, he could feel ideas forming that he never would have considered in the past, and he needed to test them all, but as that god finally left, there were 3 more in the realm, all looking at him with worry about what was to come. So I suppose I'd first like to ask if the mystery skill you had us awaken contributed to all of this somehow. Nair asked him, wondering if there could have been a connection, with Hellori laughing as she answered on his behalf. It strengthens the effects of inclinations, jobs, titles, and blessings. Take a guess. That's what it does? How? No, why haven't I heard of it already? Myriad asked me to keep it to myself. He shrugged. He thought some gods might overreact if words slipped out, and yeah, honestly I see his point. So touchy up here. Everyone has a problem with a cute little god of sacrilege existing, as if I'm not just the sweetest little guy who's ever reached the 3rd tier. And as curious as I am about all of that, said the goddess among them. For now, let's focus on the actual change you went through. What all happened? A bunch. I got 3 levels to my integrated divine body, which is pretty nice considering how much it's been boosting my healing rate. Speaking of, how's my body doing down there? Traumatically bad, but thanks to the efforts of your friends, it seems certain you'll live. His god sighed. Still, you said you're aware of your body a bit while being up here, but if you're not feeling the pain, then I wouldn't go down until they're done. I've never actually seen a mortal link their mind to a god's before, but there are unexpected levels of damage. Your muscles spasm so hard they rip to shreds with enough force to break your bones, and well, as much as I absolutely hate the fact that this isn't the first time it's happened to you, you're also bleeding pretty heavily from every pore in your body. Oh yeah, they're gonna be so pissed down there when I get back. Okay. Staying up here for a bit longer sounds like a plan. He nodded. And as for other changes, well, I'm gonna need to experiment a lot with both skills before I really talk about either of them, but I've got 2 new titles and 2 new skills too, which I guess shouldn't be surprising since bonus skills are guaranteed for 3rd tier awakenings, but still interesting. Well, start with the titles, Nair told him. One's going to be First of the Faith, I'm sure. What's the other? First Human God, which is pretty cool. Didn't expect being the first human on the planet to reach godhood to come with an extra little perk. Interesting, Hellori muttered. In this universe, normally every race is born under a god, so anyone who rises to godhood can never be the first of their people, but the 3rd tier summoned we got didn't come with that title themselves despite being in the same position of godless races. Well, Yuzu's people actually did have gods, same with Abel, sort of. Sure, but not in this universe, and the natures of those ones seemed objectively different from what makes someone a god here. It shouldn't have counted. Plus, we got third tiers from realities that really were godless too, just look at Verbum. The fact you have this title, but they can't help but be a little surprising. But none of those third tiers worked for it either, Nair pointed out. The system might be treating them as, if not akin to us, then as something close. Natural gods who didn't grow for their power. What a curious result. Considering that the few other summoned who came with completely new skills didn't get the skill learner title like he did either, it could also just be a matter of some titles needing to be properly worked for, Myriad pointed out. A certain level of effort tends to matter. And as far as titles go, there was actually one more interesting result too, Ben added. Destined Holder of Alien Thought Structure grew to Destined God of Alien Thought Structure. The title was upgraded. It was something he'd been vaguely aware could happen, even if it was the first time he'd experienced it himself, but the only cases he knew of were for royalty who ascended to their thrones, with titles like Prince or Princess growing to King or Queen. Considering how many he himself held at that point, for it to happen at all came as a neat surprise, with the rest capturing Hilori's interest. Considering a second-tier unleveled skill merged into it, the system must be treating it like that skill itself was the one to awaken as well, which we've seen before in second-tier awakenings, but still, what an interesting find. So that means any skills that you're the first to hold which grows to the third tier will likely always get you that title upgrade. This story has been taken without authorization. Report any sightings. Which means if I awaken Connect to the third tier, you'll be looking at the destined god of Connect. Eat your heart out, Myriad. While I suppress the crushing fact that despite awakening 2 skills to the third tier, I now have to manage one more. Ugh, why? Myriad. You said this all happened because he linked up to your mind? Hilori asked, ignoring Ben's outburst to focus on the other god who seemed mostly confused by the question. What? Did you not know he was going to do that? He said he asked you to distract me. He did, but he didn't tell me why, he just said it was important. I was in no way expecting any of this. Anyway though, if that's how you awakened them, then the answer of how things turned out this way is simple. Yeah, I know, Ben said, pinching his brow. The strain from connecting to him that I'd wanted to push my connect into growing was all placed on my mind instead. It was a rhetorical why. A very unhappy rhetorical why. That had been his best bet for trying to awaken Connect. He could come up with a few more ideas, hell, he could even try the one he'd made up for Myriad in the past to try to avoid any suspicions of his real goal and connect to every spirit in the world at once, but there was no denying that his best chance had just failed. And I can keep connecting to more gods once I verify that doing it isn't going to destroy my body a second time, which it shouldn't based on the changes I've gone through with awakening, but if I've already done it once and it wasn't enough, no. It might just be a matter of repeated exposure to keep lowering the barrier. This idea hasn't failed yet. And then your new skills? Nair asked. I can only imagine what might have grown in you from this. Well, since Eldritch Mind is one of my blessed skills, I have a new second-tier one called Mind Break, which, I don't know, from the name alone is either going to help me break other people's minds or keep my own from breaking dash. Not that you'd even need something like that with the new shape of yours. Myriad cut in. The bit you showed everyone had a big enough effect, and seeing it in its entirety was traumatic. And as rude as that was to hear, it's a fair point. As for my sacrilege-derived skill though, it's called Realm Access. No way of knowing if I won the dice roll and got a second-tier skill for it, but the name sure sounds like it, right? Hilori's face scrunched up with the answer. As all of us have seen by this point, you can already access whatever realm you want just fine. Yeah, so I have no clue, but I'll be taking a day or two to figure this out, with one more thing you guys probably aren't going to like hearing. I'd actually prefer it if you didn't tell me, Myriad tried, being completely ignored for it as Ben focused on Nair. You guys have said before that a couple people have managed to get a level to their third-tier skills in the past, right? That's part of why I'm helping all of them get through their jobs. You're all hoping that at least one of them might be able to get a level, even if the odds are slim. Correct. And before, when I was asking you about World Killer and the topic of the hypothetical potential of fourth-tier skills came up, you said that perhaps it would be possible for a mortal with thousands of years and talent to go with it, yeah? I believe the implication was that it would only potentially be possible if a mortal was able to live in and fully use that sort of timescale, but, Ben, where is this going? Forget thousands of years. I've just gotten hundreds of thousands at least, he said, tapping the side of his head. I'm not actually sure yet. I'd need to try and measure my new thought speed, but that's not the point. The point is that time is relative, and if I can make a couple ideas work, then not only will I be able to level my sacrilege a few more times before the next wave, I'll even be able to awaken a couple more skills I couldn't care less about to the 3rd tier for the attribute bonuses, and if all of that works, then I'll maybe even end with as much as a 10% chance of not instantly dying when I try to deal with Own, so long as I do get my Connect awakening in the end. I'll tell you, even if it wasn't the goal, awakening my mind has left me with all sorts of fun options. The other gods of this world are going to want to kill me for all over again. No matter how much they wanted to, not one of the 3 gods could tell him what he was saying was impossible after all he'd just done. They were no longer dealing with a mortal, but instead a mind god like no other who'd been finding better and faster ways to grow ever since he'd arrived on that planet, leaving all of them to only imagine what sort of chaos Ben was about to unleash with the new level of power he'd claimed for himself. Empty skies, Myriad muttered, his despair clear. If you really do level your sacrilege even once more, it might be impossible to keep the other gods from killing you. They can try all they want. I'll turn them into experience under my feet. He laughed as he imagined the future. There was still so much for him to do and so many things he'd need to pull off to if he wanted even the slightest chance of both victory and survival, but he'd already been working for that for so long. The chance to have some real, significant progress was tantalizing as new plans were shaped in his head to achieve every one of his goals. All right, so how's my body doing down there right now? Ben asked his god, the cube's exasperation coming off of him in waves. I'd say you're 90% healed, which, to be clear, means you're still a complete mess. 90% rounds up. I should finally be good enough to go down and face the music for nearly killing yourself in front of so many people who love you? Hellori asked him, easily imagining there being some choice words from the group below while he just gave her a look. What? No, obviously not. Each time my mind's grown stronger, I've been able to connect to higher beings more safely. I need to make sure that holds true for the 3rd tier while I'm still surrounded by healers. Hellori, come over here and give me your hand. Nair, you're next. The realm fell silent, none of them believing what they were hearing, even if for Myriad in particular the reason was different. Ben, I've already experienced the new power of your mind. You'll be fine. Trust but verify. I'm sure I'll be fine too, but if I ever need to connect to another god for any reason, I want to be sure that there isn't some aspect to them besides their mental power that might harm me. If there was, then your sacrilege would almost certainly cover it too. And yet, none of that reassurance is as important as taking the time to actually verify, so if you would, he said, waving his hand in Hellori's direction. After you and Nair, then I'll probably try the both of you at the same time too, and if that doesn't hurt either, then we'll throw Myriad into the mix to be sure. Just a small, quick round of testing with you all, and then I'll go down to face whatever music's waiting for me. If this hurts you again, I'm taking no responsibility. The goddess gave in, accepting his hand and watching Ben grin. Wouldn't expect you to. Now, without further ado, he formed the connection between them, feeling aspects of her divine mind imprint on his own, just as Myriad's had before her, but otherwise being left unchanged for it. Even as what else came with the connection left him staring into her in a way that made Hellori shift under his gaze. What? I'm seeing system information on you. Something he hadn't remotely expected. Something he hadn't noticed in his own god at the time with the trauma that first connection had left on the whole of his existence. But he could see 2 qualities listed within her, clear as any of the skills he could see listed in a mortal, with her natures as both a mind and magic goddess laid bare before him and leaving Nair to speak up. Stolen from its rightful place, this narrative is not meant to be on Amazon. Report any sightings. A side effect, the god sighed, and a useless one at that. The system has a species-wide intelligence limit to the souls it binds with, and while it wasn't expected when I first started making it, deities count. There was some excitement for it at first, of course, but the truth is inescapable. We're powerful but not beings capable of growth. the limits of our divinities dictated by the faith we receive. It has led to us being marginally better at using that faith, but unfortunately, it seems that's all. Huh, so you're kind of similar to mana-based life on that front then. Interesting, Ben muttered. But also boring, especially considering the fact that Halori's thoughts are showing me you're telling the truth. Don't read my mind, she said, ripping her hand away and getting an empty stare for the comment. Do you not read every mortal mind you encounter? This feels like a double standard. The difference is that it's a part of any god's nature that can't just be turned off. Not an intentional breach of privacy. Okay, fine, I'll keep that in mind. And so how am I looking down there? It doesn't feel like I'm suddenly dying again, but if my body was just killed and I ascended without noticing, break it to me gently. You're fine, no side effects of any sort, Myriad told him, clearly relieved. Sweet, in that case, let's skip a step here. Halori and Nair, I'll jump to doing the both of you at the same time, so if you don't mind. He didn't bother giving either a chance to come closer, that time stretching out his soul around him to capture them within his range. Feeling Nair's thought structure imprint that time while he examined what was in their heads and finding to his displeasure that they'd both been able to tell what he'd been doing. His soul unhidden from their watch. Which means I can't connect to large groups of gods in secret, at least not currently. Lame. He was certain he'd be able to get away with it if he connected to them through touch, but without some experimenting, that was all he'd be managing. Meaning he wouldn't be able to poke around any minds the next time a group came to put him in his place and leaving him to sigh as he expanded the range a bit more, bringing Myriad into it too. And I still feel fine. Anything down below? Nothing, his god told him. And having personally felt your new mind, I can confidently say that you'll keep being the winner in terms of mental power. I'll politely ask you to not unsheath it in its entirety around friendly company. Yeah, you got it, but for now, unless anyone else has any good excuses I can use to delay things a bit, I need to go down and see reactions. It'll be fine, right? They just watched you turn into a god, and only one among them has the eyes to see that you did it for two separate skills. Halori laughed. I don't think it's possible to escape a big reaction. Yeah, I was more talking about nearly dying around all of them. Myriad's already mentioned that there's a lot of blood, and not even an hour ago I was being chewed out about the last time I nearly died. Ah, that. Well, just remember that no matter how anyone acts, you deserve it. Oh joy, thanks, he sighed, already having his expectations for it all and only hoping that maybe, just maybe, if reaching the third tier didn't prove to be enough of a distraction to save himself from an earful, then revealing that he'd pulled it off twice would get him a bit more of a break. He didn't open his eyes when he went down, at least not immediately, with his focus directed to something beyond the world around him, his attention placed entirely on feeling the changes within himself. With there being plenty on that front alone to sort out. Beyond the basic pain from what remained of his wounds, injuries still far worse than what he'd expected to find when his god had told him he was nearly fully healed, was what seemed like nearly endless strength filling him to the brim and permanently altering the level of power he had to play with. Awakening a skill to the second tier for the first time may have boosted a person's attributes by half, but a third-tier awakening would double what a person had, and Ben had just gotten 2 of them. Even if the effects were going to be halved for the second one, given the rules awakening bonuses seemed to play under, in an instant he'd turned himself into one of the most powerful people in that room, all of the more so for the favor he'd asked before he'd gone up. Keeping it discreet at the time, he'd asked Yuzu to cast spells on him while he closed his eyes, both lowering his awakening threshold for whatever help it would give, but more importantly, enhancing his awakening effects as well, same as she'd done for everyone he'd helped to awaken in the past, and leaving him all the more powerful for that fact. Even reduced by his resistances and his resistance enhancement, with the power he'd already held, any extra boost was going to be significant. While his intelligence was going to be hard to quantify the difference for and likely to remain that way until he could test how easier actualizing would become for him. Other than that, any changes that might have come with it would be left as likely to be a side effect of Eldritch Mind for all of the changes it brought to how he would think. Vitality too would be harder to judge, especially as broken and beaten as he'd felt in that moment, but everything else was a matter of how much he could properly experience while laying there. With the most obvious of them being his strength, his body overflowing with it. Holding a value that had to have been nearly 9,000 compared to the 90 he'd arrived on the world with, It felt like he'd be able to crush diamonds in his fists and tie a crowbar into a knot. He immediately had thoughts of trying to sculpt metal like it was clay, and that was only one attribute. Stamina was another. He'd need to wait a bit to get a sense for the full degree it had grown, but even his hated agility felt inherently higher, needing to be above 3,000 after all of that and practically leaving his body twitching with a need to move. He could only imagine the changes he would see when he got to physically testing that attribute, but everything else paled in comparison to one above all else. His mana, an attribute that needed to be at nearly 30,000 when it had been less than 10 that same morning. He could feel every drop of it in his soul, begging to be used and played with, but held off for the time for what else he could feel around him. Eyes. His senses had changed drastically and would need to be explored, but one thing above all else was present, and that was the feeling of being watched. Not by the people around him and not caused by the 10 hands pressed against and healing his body, but from somewhere far higher. His sacrilege telling him that there were gods staring down. Each one identifiably, at least to an extent. He could tell which ones were coming from Myriad, Nair, and Helori, and both Analia and Jagal were clear too. He could notice Fixed and even both Aneth and Olencia staring down from the heavens above, and of the gods he didn't know by name. He could tell from either the sight of them in any of the meetings he'd been through or else the faith he'd felt from the last time he'd passed through a communal church, and he wanted none of it. On his side or not, what he desired was privacy, and with that thought came that very thing. His sacrilege reacting to his will to make the gazes he felt vanish, only leaving questions in his mind in their place. Did that make it so they can't see me, or make it so I can't feel them? Either way, another thing to experiment with later. For now, he could put it off no longer and finally opened his eyes, greeting the world around him for what more changes would come. Instantly he could see Thera, Yuzu, Steph, Lux, and even Jake swarming him, hands pressed against his body and covered in his blood, doing everything they could to heal him, and the panic they held for just how much work it was, with a small part of him noting that none of the non-healers had left the room. Jake either having filled the small job Ben had given him in the form of a note asking he make sure to keep everyone in there or else not needing to. It had been a party after all. A break from the madness of the world and filled with some of the highest quality food anyone could eat, but either way, he was grateful that no healer had slipped out for a break from it all. But beyond just their presence, he was seeing something else in each of them. He'd been able to see the faith in a person since he'd awakened his sacrilege to its second tier, or at least he'd thought he had been, but now it was distinct in a way it had never been before, making it clear that what he had been seeing that whole time was two different aspects that could be found in a soul. The faith it generated, sure, but beyond that, the divine system bound to it. He was seeing it on a purely structural level, still not able to view titles or jobs or affinities the way he could a person's skills, but that alone was interesting for him, leaving the feeling that his sacrilege had enhanced what soul sight he already held and giving him more to think on when it came to how he'd make then, with more modifications he could test coming to him in a flash now that his thought structure had changed so radically, even if that was a future problem. While not in perfect condition, he was in good enough shape to give the healers around him some leeway, letting them notice that he was finally awake. Love this story? Find the genuine version on the author's preferred platform and support their work. So thanks for keeping me alive, he started with, making sure the gratitude came through in his voice while he was stared down by everyone around him. Ben-Thera began, hesitation in her voice that was cut off by two others speaking over each other. Steph and Yuzu screaming at him. What just happened? What did you do? One was already far more informed than the other, Yuzu able to see both awakenings in his soul, but it was clear there were questions on all of their lips, with their minds splitting them between those who understood what happened and those who didn't, all of them waiting for his answer. I finally broke through to the third tier. It went slightly worse than expected. Thanks for being so quick with the healing, by the way. It was what most of them already expected, but hearing him actually say as much left all sorts of feelings among them. A third tier after 5 years of work was the main thought of the natives, something that felt like an impossibility before them. Even if he was already an adult when he'd arrived on the world, with the amount of time he had to grow to such a height, it was like being told a child had clawed their way up to godhood. For the other summoned, it was different. Even if they knew it was absurd, their starting point had been far beyond his. They'd already known they'd been overtaken too, but now they were talking about a level of power that went so far beyond anything else he'd achieved. They'd been completely eclipsed to a point that was too great to even compare themselves, leaving everyone there dealing with the inescapable truth of what they'd been told. Godhood, Amy muttered while Jake's eyes gleamed. For what skill and how? Let's put a small hold on that. Give me a second to sort myself out. He could feel his blood on and around him, mostly dried by that point but still annoyingly present, and he spent his mana to fix that, pulling it away from every inch of his flesh and off the hands of those who healed him, pulling it from their clothing too, with any that had soaked into the couch before breaking it down to its constituent parts, turning what bits of it he could into air while what was left scattered about as dust, gone and leaving the scene like it hadn't just been a bloody mess. Much better, he said as he stretched out. His state improved just a bit for being clean while Abris shook his head. Getting to bear witness to a second awakening like that in my lifetime, eternity really does grant a number of pleasures. How are you feeling? Different. Powerful. A whole lot all at once, but I'll adjust soon enough. His words were cut off by Thera grabbing his cheeks and squeezing, making it clear enough at least that she wasn't entirely lost in his accomplishment. Ben, what did you do? Less a question than a demand for answers. He knew he couldn't put it off any longer with everyone there curious. He was a contender for too many skills for them to not want an explanation, and there was no way he'd be able to get out of giving them one. I connected to my God, and this is how it turned out. Putting my mind against a divine one was, well, risky would be the right word, but given the state it had already grown to, I felt pretty confident about how it would turn out. And the skill? Reconstructed alien thought structure, knowledge, unnatural thought speed, unnatural inspiration, and lucid dreaming all merged into my unnatural mind and awakened to eldritch mind. He started. Hearing Jake whistle and seeing a small flash of hope in Thera's eyes that he knew he was about to crush. And my ill intent merged into king of sacrilege to grow to evil god of sacrilege. A statement that would have left a dropping pin to echo through the room with his claim of awakening not one but two skills and just how problematic the name of one of them was going to be. But none of that mattered. He could see the answer crush Thera for one inescapable reason. He'd just achieved half of his impossible goal. She hadn't thought he'd be able to make it to the third tier in the time they had left, and so long as he couldn't, then he wouldn't do anything suicidal for the planet, but now she was faced with how overwhelmingly possible it felt that he might achieve it, basically sealing his fate if he did. He needed to awaken one more skill to have the confidence to even try to fight on, but what was one more awakening when he'd already proven to himself that that was a barrier he could surpass? His success had gone from an improbability to something that felt like an inevitability in one fell swoop, and she was doing her best to process the emotions that left in her while he went on. Neither of those was the goal, mind you. I was trying to awaken Connect, but it was my mind that took all of the strain, so it didn't go exactly like I'd hoped, but the fact I got two from this was quite the bonus. And were the gods okay about this? Yuzu asked, the only one among them who'd already been aware of his reveal. Your sacrilege is kind of... Some weren't happy, he said, keeping it light on the details. But luckily, enough other gods like me so things worked out fine. I can confidently say that nobody up there should be trying to do anything about me until the war is done. That still doesn't sound good. You know that, right? And if I live through the war, then I'll figure out how to deal with any outcry from them then. He shrugged. Just like I am for them. They're all a future concern for me. It's not something I'm going to stress about. Except if they find out some of the other stuff I'm going to try and do soon, then things are going to get a whole lot more complicated for me, so I'm going to have to try and keep a few secrets if I can after a bit of planning and testing is done, but it's fine. I'll make it work. Path to overwhelming power and all of that. I just have to be able to reach it. Anyway, Ben went on as he tried to get up. Not to brag, but it looks like there is a whole new reason to celebrate. So why don't we enjoy the party for just a little longer before it gets too late and dash? Ben. Thera cut him off, grabbing his cheeks again and squeezing all of the harder with the glare on her face taking over what worries for the future she held. If you think you're going to somehow get away with not getting an earful for tricking everyone into gathering, so you'd have a bunch of powerful healers around during your attempted suicide, you're out of your mind. Okay. But in my small bit of defense, it wasn't actually you all I was trying to trick. I just didn't want any of the gods finding out and trying to stop me. Not better. Now that she'd pointed it out, all of the other healers in the room took on a much firmer look as well, leaving him to accept his fate while counting what slim blessings he had. After all, it looks like they're distracted enough with this that nobody is going to ask me what modifier compatibility does anymore.